In the age when Fimbulwinter gripped the Nine Realms in endless cold, when the Lake of Nine froze solid and the very stars seemed to dim in Odin's paranoid shadow, the sky itself screamed. It was not thunder. It was not the roar of dragons circling Midgard's peaks. It was something else entirely, a sound that had no place in Norse mythology, no precedent in the tapestries of fate the Norns had woven since the beginning of time. A crimson streak tore across the heavens like a wound bleeding fire, and where it fell, the earth itself shuddered in recognition of something fundamentally wrong. The impact carved a crater into the frozen wilderness north of the Lake of Nine, sending shockwaves that rattled the World Tree's roots and caused every raven in Odin's service to take flight in screeching chaos. In Asgard, the Allfather's single eye snapped open from troubled dreams. In the frozen wastes, something that should not exist drew its first breath in a world that would test every principle it held sacred. Kratos felt the impact through the soles of his boots. He stood on the deck of his modest home, axe in hand, the Leviathan's frost already forming along its blade in response to his rising tension. Beside him, Atreus looked up from the bough he'd been restringing, his eyes wide with the kind of curiosity that had gotten them into trouble more times than the Spartan cared to count. "Father," the boy said, his voice carrying that mixture of excitement and caution that meant he was already planning to investigate. That was no meteor. Kratos grunted, his scarred face impassive as he scanned the tree line. The ghost of Sparta had learned to trust his instincts, and every instinct screamed that whatever had fallen from the sky was not natural to this realm or any other in the Norse cosmology. "We investigate," he said finally, his gravelly voice brooking no argument. "Stay close. Stay alert." He didn't add what they both knew, that in a world where gods plotted and monsters lurked behind every frozen pine, anything unexpected was typically lethal. They moved through the snow with practiced efficiency, Kratos' heavy footfalls crunching through ice while Atreus ghosted along beside him, his bow ready and his divine senses still developing, still unpredictable, reaching out to taste whatever wrongness had invaded their realm. The forest was too quiet. No Draugr stirred in their graves. No wolves howled in the distance. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The crater came into view through the trees, and Kratos raised his fist, signaling Atreus to halt. Steam rose from the impact site, melting the permafrost in a perfect circle that seemed to mock Fimbulwinter's grip. At the center lay a figure, humanoid, but clearly not human. He was tall, powerfully built, wearing strange garments of blue and red that bore no resemblance to any armor Kratos had ever seen across two pantheons. A crimson cape spread beneath him like spilled blood against the white snow, and on his chest a symbol blazed, an angular rune that Kratos didn't recognize but that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The stranger's chest rose and fell with steady breaths. Alive, then. Possibly dangerous. Definitely not from any of the Nine Realms. "Is he a god?" Atreus whispered, nocking an arrow but not drawing. The boy had learned caution the hard way. Kratos descended into the crater, the Leviathan axe gripped in both hands, ready to bury it in the stranger's skull if this proved to be another of Odin's schemes. The Allfather's paranoia had spawned countless tricks and traps, and Kratos had survived them all by trusting nothing and no one. He stood over the fallen figure, studying him with a warrior's eye. The stranger's face was young, almost impossibly so, no scars, no weathering from battle or hardship. His dark hair was unmarred by frost despite lying in the snow, and strangest of all, he radiated warmth. Not the heat of fire or forge, but something else. Something that pushed back against the endless winter like a sun that refused to be extinguished. The stranger's eyes opened. They were blue, not the pale blue of winter ice, but a vivid, almost painful blue that seemed to hold entire skies within them. He sat up with a gasp, and Kratos raised the axe, frost trailing from its edge. "Do not move," the Spartan commanded, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had killed gods and expected obedience. The stranger's eyes focused on the axe, then traveled up to Kratos' face, taking in the ash-white skin, the red tattoo, the eyes that had witnessed the fall of Olympus. For a moment, confusion reigned in that impossibly young face. Then something like recognition dawned, though not the kind Kratos expected. "Easy," the stranger said, raising his hands slowly, palms out in a gesture of peace. His voice was deep, resonant, and carried an accent Kratos couldn't place. Not Greek, not Norse, not anything he'd encountered in 2 lifetimes of slaughter. "I'm not here to fight. I don't know where here is." Atreus scrambled down into the crater, his curiosity overriding caution. "You fell from the sky. We saw it. Are you from another realm? Are you Vanir, Aesir? You don't look like any god I've seen." The stranger's eyes shifted to the boy, and something softened in his expression. "I'm not a god," he said carefully, as if the words themselves were uncertain. "My name is Kal-El. Some call me Clark. Where I'm from?" He paused, looking up at the sky as if searching for something that was no longer there. "Where I'm from, they call me Superman." Kratos' grip on the axe tightened. Superman. Superman. A title that spoke of superiority, of power beyond mortals. He'd heard similar arrogance from gods across 2 pantheons, and it always ended the same way, with divine blood on his blades and ashes where golden halls once stood. "You claim to be above men," Kratos said flatly, "and you expect mercy?" Something flickered across Superman's face. Not anger, but something closer to sadness. "No," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It means I'm supposed to help them, protect them. Where I come from, it means hope." He touched the symbol on his chest, that angular rune that pulsed like a heartbeat. "This is the symbol of my house, the House of El. On my world, it means hope." Kratos stared at the stranger who spoke of hope in a realm where hope had long since frozen to death, where gods preyed on mortals and mortals prayed to gods who didn't care, where the only truth was the edge of a blade and the only peace came after death. Hope. The word tasted like ash in his mouth, like the ashes of his wife and daughter that still clung to his skin after all these years. "Hope died in this realm long ago," Kratos said, lowering the axe slightly but not sheathing it. "If you carry it, you will learn to bury it, or it will bury you." Superman met his eyes, and in that gaze, Kratos saw something he hadn't expected. Not naivety, not arrogance, but a determination that bordered on madness. The determination of someone who had chosen to believe in something despite every reason not to. "Then maybe," Superman said, rising slowly to his feet, snow cascading off his strange red cape. "It's time hope returned." In Asgard, Odin's ravens shrieked warnings that would not be heeded in time. The prophecy had begun to unfold, and not even the All-Father could see how this particular thread would weave through fate's tapestry. A stranger from beyond the stars had fallen to Midgard, and the 9 realms would never be the same. If you hunger for more tales of gods and monsters, strike that subscribe button like a Spartan's blade. Drop a comment below with the myth or character you want explored next. The gods are listening. The stranger called Superman stood in the crater he'd made, and Kratos studied him the way he'd studied every enemy, every ally, every god who'd promised partnership before betrayal. The man radiated power, not the divine arrogance of Aesir or the primal fury of Jötnar, but something else entirely, something that felt fundamentally alien to the 9 realms. Atreus circled him like a curious wolf, his bow lowered, but ready. "You said you're not a god," the boy said, his divine blood giving him insight beyond his years. "But you're not mortal either. I can feel it. You're different, like you're made of different stuff than everything else here." Superman nodded slowly, seeming to appreciate the boy's directness. "Where I'm from, I'm called an alien. My birth planet was called Krypton. It was destroyed when I was an infant. I was sent to another world, Earth, and raised by humans. The yellow sun of that world gave me abilities." "Abilities," Kratos repeated, the word heavy with suspicion. "Show me." It wasn't a request. Superman hesitated, and in that hesitation, Kratos saw something unexpected. Restraint. The stranger wasn't refusing out of fear or pride, but out of something closer to caution, as if his power was something to be carefully controlled. Not unleashed at the first provocation. "I'd rather not," Superman said carefully. "I don't know how I got here or what forces are at play. Demonstrating my abilities might attract attention we're not ready for." Kratos almost smiled. Almost. The stranger spoke like someone who'd learned that power drew predators. In that, at least, they had common ground. "You already attracted attention," Kratos said, gesturing to the massive crater with his axe. "Every being in Midgard, with eyes, saw your arrival, and if they saw it here, Odin saw it in Asgard." At the mention of Odin's name, Superman's expression shifted to something like recognition. "Odin, the Norse god. Then He looked around at the frozen landscape, the impossible architecture of Yggdrasil's branches visible in the distance. The way the very air seemed thick with ancient magic. "I'm in the Norse realms, the actual Norse mythology. This is..." He trailed off, his mind clearly racing through implications. "This is where gods are real," Atreus supplied helpfully. "Where they bleed, where they scheme, and where they kill anyone who threatens their power. If Odin thinks you're dangerous..." "Everyone is dangerous to Odin," Kratos interrupted. "His paranoia poisons everything. If he saw your arrival, he will send someone to investigate, to test you, to eliminate you if necessary." As if summoned by prophecy itself, thunder rolled across the frozen sky. Not the natural thunder of storms, but the deliberate, aggressive thunder that announced the presence of a god who'd made it his signature. Atreus's eyes widened. "Thor," he whispered, his hand instinctively going to the knife at his belt, a weapon laughably inadequate against the god of thunder, but the gesture of a warrior nonetheless. Kratos felt it then, the familiar weight of divine attention settling over them like a suffocating blanket. The air itself seemed to thicken with electricity, and in the distance, lightning split the sky in patterns that were too deliberate, too controlled to be natural. Thor was coming, and he would not come with words. The Aesir god spoke in violence first, questions later if the target survived long enough to answer. Superman's posture changed, his shoulders squared, his stance widened slightly, and his eyes narrowed as he scanned the sky. A warrior's stance, Kratos noted. Not the stance of someone who'd never fought, but of someone who knew exactly how dangerous the world could be and had chosen to face it anyway. "How strong is this Thor?" Superman asked, his voice calm but focused. Kratos allowed himself that ghost of a smile again. "Strong enough to level mountains, fast enough to ride lightning, brutal enough to kill without hesitation or mercy. He is Odin's executioner, and he takes pride in his work. Will he try to kill us?" Superman's question was directed at Kratos, and the Spartan heard the implication, us, not me. The stranger was already including them in his calculations, already treating this as a shared threat rather than a personal problem. Interesting. Foolish, perhaps, but interesting. "He will try to kill you," Kratos corrected. "Whether he succeeds depends on whether you are as powerful as your title suggests." Superman looked at him then, really looked at him, and Kratos saw the assessment happening behind those impossibly blue eyes. The stranger was weighing options, calculating risks, trying to find a solution that didn't end in death. It was the look of someone who'd been in countless fights and won them without crossing lines. Others would have crossed without hesitation. "I don't want to kill anyone," Superman said finally. "Not even a god." Kratos snorted, a sound without humor. "Then you have already lost." The thunder grew closer, and with it came the sound that made even dragons flee their mountain nests. The whistle of Mjolnir cutting through air at speeds that defied mortal comprehension. Thor was coming, and he was not coming alone. From the tree line, shapes emerged. Einherjar warriors, the honored dead bound to Odin's service, their spectral forms flickering between solid and translucent as they surrounded the crater. 24 of them, maybe more, all armed with weapons that had tasted divine blood before. All watching the stranger with a kind of cold focus that preceded slaughter. And then Thor arrived, not landing but crashing into the ground with enough force to send shock waves through the frozen earth. He was massive, even by the standards of gods Kratos had killed. Easily 7 feet of pure muscle wrapped in armor that had been worn in 10,000 battles. His red hair and beard were wild, untamed, and his eyes held the cruel intelligence of a predator who'd never met prey that could truly challenge him. Mjolnir rested casually on his shoulder, lightning dancing along its head like eager hounds awaiting the command to hunt. "So," Thor rumbled, his voice like grinding stone and distant thunder. "The star that fell. Odin wants to know what you are, stranger, whether you're a threat to Asgard." His lips pulled back in something that might have been a smile on a less dangerous face. "I'm hoping you are. It's been boring lately." Superman stepped forward, placing himself between Thor and the crater where Atreus still stood. A protective gesture, Kratos noted. Instinctive. The stranger's first thought was shielding the boy, not calculating his own survival. Either incredibly noble or incredibly stupid. In Kratos' experience, there was little difference between the two. "I'm not a threat to anyone," Superman said, his voice carrying clearly despite the rising wind. "I don't know how I got here, but I'm not looking for a fight. If Odin wants to talk, I'll talk, but I won't let you hurt anyone." Thor's laughter boomed across the frozen landscape, and when the Einherjar joined in, a chorus of dead men who remembered what humor was, but no longer understood why things were funny. "You'll talk," Thor said, pointing Mjolnir at Superman like an accusation. "After I've beaten the arrogance out of you. After you've learned that in the 9 realms, strength is the only language gods respect." The hammer began to glow, lightning coiling around it in thick ropes of barely contained destruction. "Let's see if a fallen star bleeds." Superman's eyes tracked the lightning coiling around Mjolnir with the intensity of someone analyzing a threat he'd never encountered before. Kratos recognized that look. He'd worn it himself the first time he'd faced a god whose powers operated outside the rules he understood. The Kryptonian's jaw tightened, and for just a moment, something like concern flickered across his features before being replaced by resolve. "I said I don't want to fight," Superman repeated, his voice steady despite Thor's obvious intent. "But I will defend myself and these people if you force me to." Thor's grin widened, showing teeth that had torn through tougher hides than mortal flesh. "Good. I'd be disappointed if you just rolled over and died." He didn't give Superman time to respond. Mjolnir left his hand like a lightning bolt given form, crossing the distance between them faster than sound, faster than thought, trailing thunder in its wake. Superman moved, and even Kratos, who had fought gods across 2 pantheons, felt surprise register somewhere in his warrior's instincts. The Kryptonian simply wasn't there anymore when Mjolnir reached the space he'd occupied. He'd moved sideways with such speed that the snow didn't even have time to settle before he reappeared 10 feet away, his cape still catching up to the motion. The enchanted hammer buried itself in the frozen ground where Superman had stood, and the impact sent a shockwave that shattered trees 100 yards distant. Thor recalled Mjolnir with a thought, the weapon flying back to his hand as his expression shifted from amused confidence to genuine interest. "Fast," the god of thunder acknowledged, rolling his massive shoulders as lightning began to dance not just around his hammer, but across his entire body. "Let's see if you're durable." He launched himself at Superman with a kind of speed that made mortals see only a blur of red beard and crackling energy. Mjolnir swung in a horizontal arc designed to cave in the Kryptonian's ribcage, and this time Superman didn't dodge. He raised his arms in a cross block, and when the hammer connected, the sound was like the world tree itself being struck by cosmic lightning. The shockwave flattened every tree in a 50-foot radius and sent the Einherjar stumbling backward, their spectral forms flickering from the sheer force of impact. But Superman stood his ground. His boots had carved trenches through the frozen earth from the force of the blow, and his arms trembled from the impact, but he stood. Thor's eyes widened fractionally, the look of a predator realizing its prey had teeth. "Impossible," the god of thunder breathed, genuine shock coloring his voice. "Nothing mortal withstands a direct blow from Mjolnir. Nothing." Superman lowered his arms slowly, and Kratos saw the red marks already fading from his forearms where the hammer had connected. Healing. The stranger was healing from a blow that should have pulverized bone and liquefied organs. "I told you," Superman said, and now there was something like steel beneath the compassion in his voice. "I'm not from here. Your hammer is powerful, but where I'm from, I've fought beings who could crack planets. I don't want to hurt you, Thor, but I won't let you hurt them." He gestured toward Kratos and Atreus without taking his eyes off the god of thunder. Atreus had scrambled out of the crater to stand beside Kratos, his bow drawn and utterly useless against what was unfolding. "Father," the boy whispered urgently, "should we help him?" Kratos watched the confrontation with the cold calculation of a warrior who'd learned to read battles the way scholars read runes. No, this is his fight, for now. But his hand tightened on the Leviathan axe anyway, frost already beginning to coat his knuckles. If this escalated beyond Thor's testing phase, if the Einherjar moved to support their master, then the Spartan would enter the fray. Not out of loyalty to this stranger called Superman, but because he'd learned long ago that Odin's dogs didn't stop at one target when they could claim multiple heads. Thor's expression had shifted entirely now. The cruel amusement was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous, genuine fury mixed with the first traces of uncertainty. "You dare compare yourself to gods?" he snarled, lightning now wreathing his entire form like a second skin. "You dare suggest I'm weak?" He raised Mjolnir skyward, and the heavens answered his call. Storm clouds that hadn't been there moments before boiled into existence, black and roiling with barely contained violence. Lightning lanced down in a dozen places at once, each bolt striking the frozen ground with enough force to vaporize stone. The temperature plummeted as wind howled through the valley, and Fimbulwinter itself seemed to intensify as in response to Thor's rage. "Einherjar!" Thor roared over the screaming wind. "If he moves, kill the Spartan and his whelp. Let's see how noble this star-fallen fool truly is." The spectral warriors moved instantly, their discipline overriding whatever fear Superman's display had inspired. 24 honored dead surged toward Kratos and Atreus with weapons raised, their hollow eyes reflecting nothing but Odin's will. Kratos felt the familiar calm settle over him, the state of perfect clarity that came when death surrounded him and the only path forward was through. "Boy," he said quietly, "stay behind me. Do not hesitate. Do not show mercy. They are already dead." Atreus nodded, his youthful face hardening into something that reminded Kratos uncomfortably of himself at that age. The boy had learned brutality in a brutal world. But before the Einherjar could close the distance, Superman moved again. He became a crimson and blue streak that intercepted the spectral warriors before they'd covered half the ground to Kratos. The Kryptonian didn't use lethal force. Kratos could see the restraint even in the speed of his movements. Superman's fists struck with precision rather than overwhelming power, targeting weapons rather than bodies, disarming the Einherjar with strikes that shattered enchanted steel, but left the warriors themselves merely stunned and thrown backward. It was impressive. It was also foolish. "They will not stop," Kratos shouted over the howling wind. "They cannot stop. They are bound to Odin's will beyond death itself." Superman hesitated for just a fraction of a second, processing this information, and that hesitation cost him. Thor had used the distraction exactly as intended. Mjolnir caught Superman in the side with a blow the Kryptonian never saw coming. And this time, the force was magnified by all the lightning Thor had been gathering. The hammer connected with a thunderclap that shattered eardrums, and Superman was launched across the frozen landscape like a meteor in reverse. He crashed through 3 ancient pines before slamming into a cliff face hard enough to crack the stone and send an avalanche of ice cascading down around him. Kratos allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. The stranger was powerful, perhaps more powerful than any being Kratos had encountered who wasn't a primordial force of nature. But power, without the willingness to use it, was just potential wasted. Superman's mercy was going to get him killed, and probably take Kratos and Atreus with him. Thor laughed, the sound booming across the valley as he hefted Mjolnir and began walking toward where Superman had landed. All that strength, and you waste it on compassion. You fight like you're afraid to hurt someone who's trying to kill you. In the 9 realms, that weakness is called suicide. The avalanche exploded outward, and Superman emerged from the cascade of ice and stone. His strange costume was torn in places, exposing skin that was already healing from cuts that would have killed any mortal. Blood, red and disturbingly human-looking, trickled from his temple before the wound sealed itself. For the first time since arriving in Midgard, Superman looked genuinely angry. "I'm not weak," he said, his voice carrying across the distance with unnatural clarity. "I'm trying to be better than my strength allows me to be. But you're right about one thing. I've been holding back." His eyes began to glow, not the soft blue of winter sky, but a burning, incandescent red that grew brighter with each passing second. Heat vision, Kratos realized, though he had no name for it. Pure destructive energy building behind those eyes, concentrated and terrible. Superman's gaze locked onto Thor, and twin beams of crimson light erupted from his eyes, with enough force to vaporize the air between them. Thor barely got Mjolnir up in time. The enchanted hammer intercepted the heat vision, and where God-forged metal met alien energy, reality itself seemed to scream in protest. Lightning and heat vision collided in a pyrotechnic display that turned night into day, and the god of thunder was driven backward, his boots carving furrows through frozen earth as he fought to hold his ground against power that had no business existing in the Norse realms. The Einherjar had regrouped and were moving toward Kratos again, but the Spartan was already in motion. The Leviathan axe sang as it left his hand, frost trailing behind it like a comet's tail. The weapon took the lead warrior in the chest, freezing him solid before the enchanted blade continued through 2 more behind him. Kratos was among them before the ice finished spreading, his fists and boots finding targets with the brutal efficiency of a man who'd fought undead legions across Greek battlefields. Atreus' arrows found gaps in spectral armor, each shaft glowing with the runic magic Kratos had taught him to channel. The boy fought smart, keeping distance and mobility, never staying in one place long enough for the Einherjar to surround him. He'd learned well, but there were too many, and they didn't tire, didn't feel pain, didn't stop unless you destroyed them completely. Kratos recalled the Leviathan axe to his hand and immediately hurled it again, the weapon spinning through 3 warriors before returning. He fought with the grim understanding that this was a delaying action at best. Superman and Thor were still locked in their stalemate of heat vision versus hammer, but that couldn't last. Something would break, and when it did, the aftermath would likely kill everyone who couldn't survive mountain-shattering force. A spectral blade found the gap in Kratos' guard, scoring a line across his ribs that burned with the cold fire of Odin's magic. The Spartan snarled and crushed the warrior's skull with his bare hands, ripping the helmet and head from translucent shoulders before hurling both at the next attacker. The wound throbbed, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years, genuine concern that he might not survive the day, Not because of the Einherjar, but because two beings of godlike power were about to stop testing each other and start actually trying to kill. Superman's heat vision cut off abruptly, and in the sudden absence of that burning light, Kratos saw why. The Kryptonian's eyes had returned to normal, but his expression was one of someone who just realized something terrible. "Enough!" Superman shouted, his voice carrying over the chaos of battle. "This is exactly what Odin wants. We're fighting each other while he watches from Asgard and gathers information. Thor, can't you see you're being used?" Thor lowered Mjolnir slowly, his chest heaving from exertion, his armor scorched in places where heat vision had found gaps around the hammer's protection. For a moment, Kratos thought the god of thunder might actually listen. Then Thor's expression hardened into the cruel certainty of a man who'd spent centuries following orders without question. "Odin's will is law," he said flatly, "and his will is that you be tested. You've proven stronger than expected, Star-Fallen. That makes you more dangerous, not less." Mjolnir began to spin, faster and faster until it was a blur of silver and lightning. "Let's see if you can fly." Thor released Mjolnir with the full force of his divine strength, and the hammer became something more than a weapon. It became inevitability given form, a meteor of enchanted Uru metal that carried behind it the accumulated fury of Asgard's greatest warrior. Superman's instincts were faster than thought. He launched himself skyward, and for the first time since arriving in the Norse realms, he flew. Not jumped, not leaped, flew, his body defying gravity with the casual ease of someone for whom flight was as natural as breathing. He ascended in a crimson and blue streak, the snow beneath him exploding outward from the force of his takeoff. And Mjolnir followed. The hammer pursued him into the storm-darkened sky with single-minded purpose, its enchantments allowing it to change trajectory mid-flight to hunt rather than simply strike. Superman twisted through the air, his cape streaming behind him as he performed aerial maneuvers that would have been impossible for anything bound by conventional physics. He rolled, dove, and spiraled through 3 dimensions of space, while Mjolnir carved contrails of lightning through the clouds in its relentless pursuit. Kratos watched this impossible aerial ballet while simultaneously crushing an Einherjar's skull against a frozen boulder. The Kryptonian moved through the sky the way Kratos moved through combat, with absolute confidence born of endless practice. But there was a critical difference. Superman was still holding back, still fighting defensively, still trying to find a solution that didn't end in death. Thor saw it too, and the god of thunder's expression shifted from fury to something more calculating. "Einherjar, fall back," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. The spectral warriors disengaged immediately, their discipline absolute as they retreated to form a perimeter around the battlefield rather than continue their assault. Kratos didn't lower his guard, but he stopped actively destroying them, his scarred chest heaving as he caught his breath. The wound across his ribs still burned with Odin's magic, a reminder that even he could bleed. Atreus moved to his father's side, an arrow still knocked, but his bow lowered slightly. "Why did he call them off?" the boy asked, his eyes tracking Superman's movements through the storm clouds above. "Because he learned what he needed to know," Kratos said grimly. "The stranger is powerful. He can fly. He has strength to match a god. But he fights like someone afraid to kill. The Spartan's eyes narrowed as he watched Mjolnir finally connect with Superman's shoulder, sending the Kryptonian spinning through the air before he righted himself with visible effort. That fear will be his death. Above them, Superman had stopped running. He hung in the sky perhaps 200 feet up, his cape billowing in winds that would have frozen mortal blood and extended his hand. When Mjolnir came at him again, he didn't dodge. He caught it. The sound was like the world tree splitting in half. Thunder roared across Midgard with such force that the Lake of Nine's ice sheet cracked in dozens of places. Lightning exploded outward from the point of contact in a sphere of destruction that vaporized snow for half a mile in every direction, and Superman held on. His entire body shook from the strain, his muscles standing out like carved marble beneath his torn costume. His teeth clenched so hard, Kratos could see it from the ground. Mjolnir fought in his grip like a living thing, trying to return to its master, spinning and pulling with force that should have torn any being's arms from their sockets. But Superman's grip held. Impossible, Atreus breathed, his divine heritage letting him sense the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Mjolnir can only be wielded by Thor. It's bound to him by Odin's enchantments. No one else should be able to even slow it down. Thor himself seemed to share his son's disbelief. The god of thunder stood frozen in place, his hand still extended to recall his weapon, his face a mask of shock that was rapidly transforming into something far more dangerous: wounded pride. "Give it back," Thor said, his voice low and deadly. Superman descended slowly, still gripping Mjolnir with both hands, his cape settling around him like a shroud as he touched down in the center of the devastated battlefield. The weapon still struggled in his grasp, still tried to return to Thor, but the Kryptonian strength was absolute. "Not until you listen," Superman said, and despite the strain of holding the hammer, his voice remained steady and reasonable. "I don't belong here. I don't know how I arrived in your realm, but I'm not your enemy, Thor. I'm not a threat to Asgard or to Odin. I just want to understand what happened and find a way home." Thor's expression flickered through several emotions: shock, fury, something that might have been respect, before settling on grim determination. "You hold Mjolnir," he said slowly, as if speaking the words made the impossible real. "No being outside Asgard's bloodline has ever done that. Do you understand what that means? What the All-Father will think when I report this?" He took a step forward, his hands crackling with lightning even without his weapon. "It means you're exactly the threat I thought you were. It means Odin was right to send me, and it means I can't let you leave this battlefield alive." Superman's jaw tightened, but he didn't release the hammer. Instead, he did something that made even Kratos pause in surprise. He extended Mjolnir toward Thor, offering it back handle first. "Then take your hammer," the Kryptonian said quietly. "Take it and make your choice. We can keep fighting until one of us is dead, or we can talk like rational beings. I've met gods before, Thor. Some of them were tyrants who needed to be stopped. Some of them were heroes who deserved respect. Which kind are you?" For a long moment, nothing moved. The Einherjar stood like statues in their perimeter. Atreus held his breath beside Kratos. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting for Thor's decision. The god of thunder stared at Superman with an expression Kratos recognized from his own reflection in darker times. The look of a warrior confronting something that challenged every assumption he'd built his identity upon. Slowly, Thor reached out and wrapped his hand around Mjolnir's handle. Superman released it without resistance, and the hammer practically leaped back to its master's grip, as if relieved to return home. Thor hefted the weapon, testing its balance, his eyes never leaving Superman's face. "You could have kept fighting," Thor said finally. "You could have used my own weapon against me while I was vulnerable. Why didn't you?" Superman met his gaze without flinching. "Because I don't want to be your enemy, and because showing mercy is always an option, even when violence seems inevitable, especially then." Something complicated passed across Thor's face. Contempt, warring with curiosity, disgust fighting against something that might have been recognition. "Mercy," he said, testing the word like a foreign language. "You speak of mercy in a realm where gods devour their children and brothers murder brothers for power, where kindness is weakness and compassion is suicide." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really aren't from here." Kratos decided it was time to intervene before Thor's internal conflict resolved itself into more violence. He strode forward, the Leviathan axe still gripped in one hand, making no effort to appear non-threatening. "Enough philosophy," the Spartan said flatly. "Thor, you've tested him. You've seen his power. What will you report to Odin?" The god of thunder's attention shifted to Kratos, and his expression hardened back into familiar cruelty. "I'll report that a being of unknown origin and immense power has fallen to Midgard, Spartan. I'll report that he's strong enough to challenge Aesir, foolish enough to believe in mercy, and dangerous enough that the Allfather will want him dead or controlled." He hefted Mjolnir thoughtfully. "Odin will send more than just me next time. He'll send Heimdall to see through any lies. He'll send the Valkyries to ensure there's no escape. And if that's not enough, he'll come himself." Superman's expression darkened, but he kept his voice level. "Then I'll talk to Odin directly. Let me go to Asgard. Let me explain what happened and prove I'm not a threat to his realm." Thor's laugh was genuine this time, sharp and bitter. "You don't understand the Allfather at all, do you? Odin doesn't care about threats. He cares about prophecy, about fate, about control." The god of thunder pointed Mjolnir at Superman like an accusation. "You fell from the sky in fire and blood. You hold power that rivals the gods. You speak of hope in a world drowning in darkness. Do you know what that sounds like to Odin? It sounds like the start of Ragnarok. It sounds like the end of everything he's built." The words hung in the frozen air like a curse. Atreus moved closer to Kratos, his young face troubled as he processed the implications. "But father," the boy said quietly, "Ragnarok is supposed to happen. The prophecies all say so. Why would Odin fight against fate itself?" Kratos placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a rare gesture of comfort. "Because Odin fears death more than anything else. He would unravel all of creation to avoid his prophesied end." The Spartan's scarred face turned toward Superman. "And now you have become part of that prophecy, whether you intended to or not. The Allfather will see you as either a weapon to control or a threat to eliminate. There is no third option." Superman looked between them, Thor with his hammer and his cruel certainty, Kratos with his scars and his grim pragmatism, Atreus with his divine blood and mortal confusion. The Kryptonian's expression showed the strain of someone trying to find a peaceful solution in a situation specifically designed to have none. "There has to be another way," he said finally. "There's always another way if people are willing to look for it. Thor, you seem like a warrior who values strength and honor. Can't you see that mindlessly following Odin's orders without question isn't honor? It's just obedience." Thor's eyes flashed with lightning. "You dare question my honor?" Superman took a step forward, unintimidated. "I'm questioning whether you've ever thought for yourself, or if you've just been Odin's weapon for so long you've forgotten there's a difference." For a heartbeat, Kratos thought Thor would attack again. Thought the temporary ceasefire would shatter into renewed violence. But instead, something unexpected happened. Thor lowered Mjolnir slightly, his expression shifting to something more contemplative. "I think for myself," he said slowly, as if testing the truth of his own words. "But I also know my duty. I know what holds the 9 realms together, and I know that Odin's paranoia, however extreme, has kept Asgard safe for longer than your civilization has existed." He gestured at the devastation surrounding them: shattered trees, melted snow, scorched earth. "You're powerful, stranger. More powerful than I expected. But power without understanding is catastrophic. You don't know our laws, our prophecies, our delicate balance. Your very existence here could trigger events you can't imagine." Superman's shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of his situation finally seeming to register. "Then help me understand. Show me how to exist here without causing harm. I didn't choose to come to your realm, but now that I'm here, I want to do the right thing. Isn't that worth something?" Thor studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and gestured to the Einherjar, who immediately began to fade like morning mist, their spectral forms returning to whatever afterlife Odin had pulled them from. "I'll give you 1 day," the god of thunder said finally. "1 day before I report back to Odin. Use it wisely. Learn what you can about where you've landed, and decide whether you're going to kneel before the All-Father or defy him, because there is no middle ground. Not in Asgard, not in any of the 9 realms." Thor summoned lightning around himself like a cloak of pure destruction, his form beginning to blur as he prepared to depart. But before he could vanish into the storm, Superman spoke again, his voice carrying an edge of desperation that hadn't been there before. "Wait, 1 day isn't enough to understand an entire mythology. I need guidance. Someone who knows Odin, knows the prophecies, knows what I'm walking into." The god of thunder paused, his form still wreathed in crackling energy, and turned back with an expression of dark amusement. "You want guidance? In a realm where every god has their own agenda and every alliance is built on temporary convenience?" He gestured toward Kratos with Mjolnir, the hammer's head still glowing with residual power. "Then ask the Spartan. He's killed more gods than anyone living. If anyone can teach you how to survive divine politics, it's the ghost of Sparta." Superman's gaze shifted to Kratos, and the Spartan felt the weight of that look. Hopeful, earnest, and entirely too trusting for someone who just survived a battle with Thor. Kratos had seen that expression before on the faces of those who thought he was a hero rather than what he truly was. A monster pointed at other monsters. "No," Kratos said flatly, before Superman could even ask. "Your problems are not mine. The boy and I have our own concerns." Thor's laugh boomed across the devastated landscape. Of course you do, Spartan. You're always so focused on your own path, your own survival. But consider this. If Superman here becomes Odin's enemy, the All-Father will mobilize all of Asgard against him. And Odin has a long memory for those who associate with his enemies. Your neutrality won't protect you or your son when the All-Father decides everyone who's spoken to this stranger is complicit in whatever threat he represents. The words hit like physical blows because they carried truth. Kratos had learned through blood and ash that in divine conflicts, there was no such thing as innocent bystanders. The gods had a way of making everyone choose sides, and those who tried to remain neutral often ended up crushed between opposing forces. Atreus stepped forward, his young face set with determination that reminded Kratos painfully of Faye. "Father, we should help him. He protected us from the Einherjar when he could have just fled. He's trying to do the right thing." The boy's hand rested on Kratos' arm, a gesture both pleading and insistent. Isn't that what Mother would have wanted? Kratos felt his jaw clench at the invocation of his dead wife's memory. Faye had always seen the best in people, had always believed in helping those who needed it, had somehow looked at the ghost of Sparta and seen someone worth saving, and she had died, leaving him with a son who'd inherited her compassionate heart, wrapped in divine blood that promised nothing but tragedy. "Your mother," Kratos said carefully, his gravelly voice carrying weight beyond the words, "would have considered all consequences before acting. Compassion without wisdom is just another way to die." But even as he spoke, he knew the decision was already made. Thor was right about Odin's paranoia. The All-Father would learn of this encounter. Through ravens, through magic, through whatever countless eyes he had scattered across the 9 realms. And when he did, anyone who'd stood in this crater with Superman would be marked as potential conspirators. Helping the stranger or refusing him made no difference to that outcome. At least helping him gave Kratos some control over the situation. Thor seemed to read the Spartan's internal calculation in his scarred face, and his grin widened. There it is, the ghost of Sparta doing what he does best, finding the angle that keeps him and his alive. Good. Keep thinking like that and you might survive what's coming. Lightning engulfed him completely, and when it dissipated, Thor was gone, leaving only scorched earth and the lingering scent of ozone where he'd stood. The silence that followed felt heavier than the battle that had preceded it. Superman turned to face Kratos fully, his torn cape settling around his shoulders like a king's mantle despite its ragged state. "I know you don't trust me," the Kryptonian said quietly, "and I understand why. You don't know me, don't know where I'm from, and every instinct you have probably says I'm going to cause more problems than I solve. But I give you my word. I will do everything in my power to resolve this situation without bringing harm to you or your son." Kratos studied him with the cold assessment of a warrior who'd heard countless promises from gods and heroes before watching them break under pressure. But there was something in Superman's eyes, not naivety exactly, but a kind of stubborn idealism that refused to die despite whatever horrors he'd clearly witnessed. It was the look of someone who'd chosen to believe the best of people even after seeing the worst. "Your word means nothing to me," Kratos said bluntly. "I have heard gods swear oaths on their immortal souls before breaking them with their next breath. Words are wind. Only actions matter. He hefted the Leviathan axe, frost still clinging to its blade, and began walking back toward the tree line. But you are correct that Odin will make this my problem whether I help you or not. So walk with us, listen, learn, and if you prove to be more threat than Eset, I will kill you myself before the All-Father does. Superman nodded, accepting the brutal honesty without flinching. That's fair, and thank you. I know this isn't easy for you. Atreus practically bounced with barely contained energy as they began the trek back through the frozen forest toward Kratos' home. This is incredible. An actual alien from another world. Father, do you realize what this means? There are realms beyond the 9 realms, beyond Yggdrasil itself. The cosmology we thought we understood is so much bigger. The boy turned to Superman, questions already spilling out faster than the Kryptonian could possibly answer. What's your world like? Do you have gods there? How did you get your powers? Can all your people fly? How did you end up here? Superman managed a small smile despite the gravity of their situation. My world, Earth, is a lot like Midgard, actually. Similar environments, similar people trying to survive and build lives. We have different mythologies, different histories, but the fundamental hopes and struggles are the same. His expression grew more somber. As for how I got here, I don't know. I was fighting someone, a powerful enemy who'd found a way to manipulate dimensional barriers. We were struggling near a tear in reality, and then everything went white. When I woke up, I was in that crater. Kratos listened while maintaining his vigilant scan of the surrounding forest. The battle with Thor had surely attracted attention from every being within miles. Draugr, trolls, or worse, could be drawn to investigate, and while Superman had proven capable against divine threats, Kratos had no idea how the stranger would handle the more mundane horrors that infested Midgard's wilderness. This enemy, Kratos said without looking back. You were fighting someone powerful enough to tear holes between worlds. Did you kill them? The question hung in the air, weighted with significance. Superman's hesitation was answer enough. I was trying to stop him without lethal force. We were fighting in populated areas. I couldn't risk... And so he escaped. Kratos interrupted, his voice flat with grim certainty. Your mercy allowed a threat to survive and potentially follow you here. You endangered everyone in your world and everyone in mine because you refused to do what was necessary. Superman's jaw tightened, and for the first time, Kratos heard real steel enter the Kryptonian's voice. I endangered people by trying to save them, by not becoming the kind of monster my enemy wanted me to be. That's a twisted way of looking at morality. Kratos stopped walking and turned to face him, his scarred face expressionless, but his eyes burning with the weight of centuries of regret. I know of what I speak, stranger. I've been the monster. I've killed without hesitation or mercy. I've drowned civilizations in blood to satisfy my vengeance. He stepped closer, forcing Superman to meet his gaze. And I've also tried to change, to be better, to protect rather than destroy. Do you know what I learned? That the world does not care about your intentions. It cares only about results. And in a realm where gods murder children for prophecy and fathers sacrifice sons for power, your mercy is not a virtue. It is a liability that will get good people killed. Superman held his ground, refusing to be intimidated despite the obvious threat Kratos represented. Then maybe that's exactly why this realm needs someone who still believes mercy matters. Maybe the reason everything here is so brutal and hopeless is because everyone has accepted that violence is the only answer. He gestured at the frozen wasteland surrounding them. Look at this place. Eternal winter, dead gods, constant warfare. Is this really the world you want your son to inherit? Or is it possible that someone needs to break the cycle? Atreus watched this exchange with wide eyes, his head swiveling between his father and this strange visitor, like someone watching an argument between opposing philosophies made flesh. "Father," the boy said hesitantly, "he has a point. You've always told me that the cycle of vengeance has to end somewhere, that we have to be better than the gods we fought. Isn't that what Mother wanted?" Kratos felt something twist in his chest at the mention of Faye again. His wife had believed in breaking cycles, in choosing a better path despite the cost. She'd believed in him when he'd given her every reason not to, and she died trying to prepare their son for a world that would demand impossible choices. "Your mother," Kratos said slowly, each word carefully measured, "believed in many things, but she also understood that survival requires hard decisions, that protecting those you love sometimes means becoming what you despise." He looked at Superman with something that might have been grudging respect. "You speak of breaking cycles. I have broken a cycle. The cycle of Greek gods who ruled through cruelty and caprice. I killed them all. Zeus, Ares, Poseidon, Hades. I drowned Olympus in divine blood and ash." The Spartan's expression hardened further. "And do you know what I learned? That destruction is easy. Building something better is infinitely harder. I killed the gods, but I did not save the mortals who suffered under them. I simply removed their masters and left chaos in the wake." Superman absorbed this confession with the gravity it deserved. "Then help me not make the same mistakes. You've seen where pure violence leads. I've seen where pure idealism can fail. Maybe between us, we can find a middle path." Before Kratos could respond, a sound cut through the forest. The unmistakable crunch of heavy footsteps moving through snow with purpose. Multiple sources moving in coordinated patterns. The Spartan's hand tightened on his axe as Atreus knocked an arrow in one smooth motion. Even Superman tensed, his eyes scanning the tree line with superhuman precision. From the shadows between ancient pines, figures emerged. Not Einherjar this time, but something worse in its own way, Asgardian soldiers, living warriors in bronze and leather armor bearing the mark of Odin's regular army. 24 of them, maybe more, forming a loose circle around Kratos' group with the practiced efficiency of men who'd fought together for decades. And leading them, mounted on a stag with antlers that glowed with runic magic, was a woman whose presence made the very air feel heavier. She wore armor of silver and green, her blonde hair braided in warrior fashion. And her eyes held the kind of cold intelligence that came from centuries of observing humanity's patterns. Kratos recognized her immediately and cursed inwardly. "Freya," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I thought you were done hunting in Midgard." The Vanir goddess smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I go where interesting events occur, Kratos, and a star falling from the sky to land near your home. That qualifies as interesting." Her gaze shifted to Superman, and her expression sharpened with predatory curiosity. "So this is the one who held Mjolnir, the one who made Thor hesitate." I had to see for myself what manner of being could accomplish such a feat. Freya dismounted from her stag with the fluid grace of someone who'd walked battlefields for millennia, her boots touching the snow without making a sound despite the weight of her armor. The Asgardian soldiers maintained their perimeter, their weapons held ready but not quite raised, a professional threat rather than an immediate one. Kratos recognized the formation. These weren't brutes meant to intimidate through force alone. They were disciplined warriors waiting for their commander's signal, capable of transitioning from watchful observation to lethal violence in a heartbeat. Superman stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between Freya and Atreus in what Kratos recognized as another protective instinct. The Kryptonian's cape had stopped billowing in the wind, settling around his shoulders as he assessed this new arrival with the same careful attention he'd given Thor. "My name is Kal-El," Superman said, his voice diplomatic but firm. "I mean no harm to you or your people. I'm trying to understand where I am and how to return home." Freya's smile widened, and Kratos felt his muscles tense further. That smile meant the goddess was genuinely amused, which in his experience meant someone was about to suffer for her entertainment. "How refreshingly honest," she said, circling Superman slowly like a predator examining unfamiliar prey. "No threats, no demands, no divine posturing, just a straightforward request delivered with what appears to be actual sincerity." She paused in front of him, tilting her head as she studied his face. "You're not from any of the 9 realms, are you? Not Aesir, not Vanir, not Jotnar. Something else entirely." Superman met her gaze without flinching. "I'm from a place called Earth. Another world, another reality entirely as far as I can tell. I was pulled here by forces I don't understand." Freya reached out suddenly, her fingers glowing with golden cider magic as she touched Superman's chest where his symbol blazed. The Kryptonian flinched but didn't pull away, though Kratos saw his jaw tighten as the goddess's magic washed over him. Her expression shifted from curiosity to fascination to something approaching concern as she sensed whatever her spell revealed. "Extraordinary," she breathed, withdrawing her hand. "Your body isn't just flesh and bone. Every cell vibrates with absorbed solar energy, processed and stored in ways that shouldn't be possible. You're essentially a living battery charged by starlight." Her eyes narrowed. "But there's something else. A vulnerability woven into your very essence. Magic. You have almost no natural resistance to it." Kratos saw Superman's expression flicker with surprise that Freya had identified his weakness so quickly. The Spartan filed that information away carefully. The stranger was phenomenally powerful in most regards, but magic could hurt him, could potentially kill him. In the Norse realms, where nearly every god and half the monsters wielded some form of cider or runic power, that was a critical weakness. "Your assessment is correct," Superman admitted, apparently deciding honesty was the better strategy. "In my world, I'm nearly invulnerable to conventional threats, but magic bypasses my defenses. Thor's hammer hurt me more than I expected because of its enchantments." Freya laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Oh, you poor fool. You've landed in the worst possible realm for someone with your particular vulnerability. The Norse pantheon builds everything on magic and runes. Odin's power is entirely magical. Heimdall's sight, the Bifrost, Yggdrasil itself, all magic. She gestured expansively at the frozen landscape. Even Fimbulwinter is sustained by enchantments meant to weaken specific bloodlines. You're swimming in the one thing that can actually kill you. Atreus had been listening intently, his divine blood giving him insight into magical theory beyond his years. "But father," the boy said, his voice troubled, "if he's that vulnerable to magic and Odin is sending people to test him, then the All-Father is gathering information to exploit," Kratos finished grimly. "Thor tested his physical strength. Next will come someone to test his magical resistance, and once Odin knows exactly how to kill him, he will deploy that knowledge without hesitation or mercy." Superman's expression hardened with realization. "So every fight, every encounter, I'm just giving Odin more weapons to use against me." Freya nodded, her earlier amusement fading into something more serious. "Precisely. The All-Father is many things. Paranoid, manipulative, obsessed with control, but he's not stupid. He's already calculating how to neutralize you. Whether through recruitment, imprisonment, or elimination depends entirely on which option seems most beneficial to Asgard's interests." She turned to face her soldiers, waving them back with a gesture that sent them retreating into the tree line, though Kratos noted they didn't disperse completely. Just gave the illusion of privacy while remaining within striking distance. The goddess was too experienced to actually lower her guard. "Which brings us to the interesting question," Freya continued, turning back to face them. "Why am I here? Not to fight you, stranger. Not yet, anyway. I'm here because anything that makes Odin nervous is worth my attention." Her expression grew colder, centuries of buried rage flickering across her features. "The All-Father and I have our own complicated history. Let's just say I have reasons to be interested in anyone or anything that threatens his carefully maintained control." Kratos understood immediately. Freya's hatred of Odin was legendary, rooted in betrayals and cruelties that spanned centuries. She'd been his wife, his prisoner, his unwilling ally, and now existed in a state of forced neutrality, maintained only by magical bindings and mutual assured destruction. If Superman truly represented a threat to Odin's power, Freya would want to cultivate that threat for her own purposes. "You want to use him as a weapon against Odin," Kratos said flatly. "Turn him into another piece on your eternal chessboard." Freya's smile returned, sharp as broken glass. "I prefer to think of it as offering strategic alliance. Superman here needs information about the Norse realms, protection from Odin's immediate wrath, and training in how to defend against magical attacks. I can provide all three." She gestured at herself with mock humility. "I am, after all, the greatest practitioner of cider magic in all 9 realms. If anyone can teach him to recognize and counter magical threats, it's me." Superman looked between Freya and Kratos, clearly trying to parse the political complexities at play. "And in exchange for this help, you'd want what? My help against Odin?" The goddess laughed again. "Oh, I like you. Direct questions deserve direct answers. Yes, eventually I would want your help against the All-Father, but not immediately, not recklessly. First, you need to survive. Then you need to understand what you're dealing with. And then, if you choose to help me settle certain debts with Odin, I would be grateful." Her expression grew more serious. "But I'm not asking you to decide now. I'm offering you a chance to learn enough to make an informed choice rather than stumbling blindly into Asgardian politics and getting yourself killed through ignorance. Kratos had to admit, however reluctantly, that Freya's offer had merit. Superman needed magical training desperately, and the Vanir goddess was perhaps the only being in Midgard capable of providing it who wasn't directly loyal to Odin. But accepting her help meant entering into obligations that could span decades or centuries. It meant becoming part of the divine conflicts that had consumed this realm long before Superman arrived. "Father?" Atreus asked quietly, clearly waiting for Kratos' assessment. The Spartan considered the situation with the cold pragmatism that had kept him alive through 2 pantheons worth of divine warfare. Superman was vulnerable to magic. That vulnerability would get him killed within days once Odin fully mobilized against him. And when Superman died, anyone associated with him would be implicated in whatever crimes the Allfather decided to attribute to the stranger's presence. Training with Freya at least gave them a fighting chance, but it also meant deeper entanglement with the goddess's schemes, and Freya's plans had a way of consuming everyone around her. "The boy and I are not part of this alliance," Kratos said finally, his voice carrying absolute authority. "If you train him, it is between you and him. We will provide what information we can about surviving in these realms, but we will not fight your war against Odin." Freya's expression showed she'd expected this response. "Fair enough, Ghost of Sparta. I wouldn't dream of dragging you into conflicts you haven't chosen for yourself." The sarcasm was light but present. Everyone knew Kratos' neutrality was a comfortable fiction that would evaporate the moment Odin forced him to choose sides. Superman seemed to sense the undercurrents, but focused on the practical aspects of Freya's offer. "If you can teach me to defend against magic, I'll accept your help. But I won't commit to fighting Odin without understanding what that actually means. I've been manipulated by enough gods and monsters in my time to know better than to make promises I might regret." Something like respect flickered across Freya's face. "Wise, very wise. Then we have an accord, at least for now." She extended her hand, and Superman shook it after only a moment's hesitation. The gesture seemed to amuse the goddess. How wonderfully mortal, a handshake to seal agreements rather than blood oaths or magical bindings. Your realm must be remarkably trusting. Before Superman could respond, the forest erupted with movement, not from Freya's soldiers, but from something else entirely. The trees themselves seemed to shudder as massive forms crashed through the underbrush, and Kratos recognized the bellowing roar that accompanied them. Trolls. 3 of them, each easily 15 feet tall and covered in stone-like hide that had weathered centuries in Midgard's harsh climate. Their eyes glowed with the sickly yellow light that indicated corruption by dark magic. Their movements held the frenzied aggression of creatures driven beyond natural rage. Thor's battle must have disturbed their territory, Freya said, her voice suddenly all business as she summoned golden satyr magic around her hands. They're enraged beyond reason. This will be a slaughter. The trolls fixed their attention on Superman with the single-minded focus of predators identifying unfamiliar prey. They charged with surprising speed for creatures of their size, the ground shaking beneath their footfalls as they closed the distance. Kratos raised the Leviathan axe, preparing to engage, but Superman was already moving. The Kryptonian launched himself at the lead troll with his earlier restraint completely abandoned. His fist connected with the creature's jaw in a haymaker that would have pulverized granite, and the troll's head snapped back with a crack like thunder. The creature stumbled, clearly hurt, but its magically enhanced durability kept it from immediate death. It swung a massive fist in retaliation, claws extended, and caught Superman across the ribs with enough force to send him crashing through 2 trees. "Magic touched hide," Freya called out, her voice carrying professional interest as she watched Superman climb from the wreckage. "They've been enhanced by some crude enchantment, not sophisticated work, but effective enough to make them resistant to conventional damage and painful to beings vulnerable to magic." Superman touched his side where the troll's claws had connected, and his hand came away with blood. Not much, but enough to prove the point. Magic hurt him. Even crude, unsophisticated magic wielded by mindless monsters could pierce his otherwise impenetrable skin. The realization showed clearly on his face. "Good," Kratos said, moving to flank the trolls while they focused on Superman. "Let this be your first lesson in why mercy is luxury you cannot afford here." The Spartan hurled the Leviathan axe in a throw that caught the second troll in the throat, frost spreading instantly across its stone-like skin. In the 9 realms, everything wants to kill you, and most of it can. Atreus's arrows found the third troll's eyes, glowing with runic magic that made them punch through the creature's enhanced hide. The boy moved with the fluid efficiency Kratos had drilled into him through countless hours of training, never staying still, always creating angles that made it difficult for the massive creature to target him effectively. Superman recovered quickly, his expression shifting to grim determination. He flew at the lead troll again, but this time his tactics changed. Instead of trying to knock it out with overwhelming force, he used his speed and flight to disorient it. He struck from multiple angles in rapid succession, creating openings that Kratos exploited ruthlessly with axe and fists. The troll's roar shook snow from the surrounding pines as it swung wildly at Superman, its massive arms carving through empty air where the Kryptonian had been milliseconds before. Kratos saw the stranger adapting in real time, learning the brutal efficiency required to survive in a realm where hesitation meant death. Superman's strikes became more focused, targeting joints and weak points rather than trying to simply overpower the creature through brute force. He grabbed the troll's arm mid-swing and twisted with enough force to dislocate the shoulder, then followed up with heat vision focused on the exposed joint, where stone-like hide was thinnest. The concentrated thermal energy didn't vaporize the creature as it might have in Superman's home realm, but it burned deep enough to elicit a bellow of genuine pain. Kratos didn't waste the opening. The Leviathan axe sang through the air as he recalled it from the second troll's throat, the blade carving through the lead troll's exposed leg with enough force to shatter its knee. The creature toppled forward, and Superman caught its head between his hands before it could recover. For a moment, the Kryptonian hesitated, his face showing the internal struggle of someone raised to preserve life, confronting a situation that demanded death. Then he looked past the troll at Atreus, who was desperately dodging the third creature's attempts to crush him, and something hardened in Superman's expression. He twisted sharply, and the troll's neck snapped with a sound like breaking timber. The creature went limp, its body collapsing into the snow with enough force to create a minor avalanche from nearby branches. Superman released it slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at what he'd done. First kill in this realm, Kratos recognized. The stranger's face showed the kind of haunted realization that came from crossing a line you'd sworn never to cross. But there was no time for processing trauma. The second troll had recovered from the Leviathan axe's strike, frost still spreading across its throat but not fast enough to stop its rampage. It charged toward Atreus with single-minded fury, clearly recognizing the boy as the weakest target. Kratos was already moving, his Spartan training overriding conscious thought, but he was too far away. The angle was wrong. He wouldn't reach Atreus before the troll's massive fist came down. Superman moved faster. One moment he was standing over the troll he'd killed, and the next he was between Atreus and certain death, his arms raised to catch the descending blow. The impact drove him 6 inches into the frozen ground, his boots carving trenches through earth and stone, but he held. The troll's fist, massive enough to crush a horse, stopped cold against Superman's crossed forearms. The Kryptonian's face contorted with effort as magical energy from the enchanted creature burned through his nervous system like acid, but his stance didn't break. "Get clear," Superman shouted to Atreus through gritted teeth, and the boys scrambled backward without hesitation. The moment Atreus was safe, Superman pushed upward with enough force to lift the troll completely off its feet. He rose into the air, carrying the creature with him, ascending 20 feet before hurling it downward with every ounce of Kryptonian strength he possessed. The troll crashed into the frozen ground with catastrophic force, creating a crater that matched the one Superman's arrival had carved earlier. Before the creature could recover, Kratos was there, the Leviathan axe already descending in a brutal overhead arc that buried the blade in the troll's skull. Frost exploded outward from the point of impact, flash freezing the creature's head and upper torso solid. The Spartan planted his boot on the troll's chest and wrenched the axe free, bringing fragments of frozen brain matter with it. The third troll, seeing 2 of its pack dead and Superman descending toward it with eyes glowing crimson with heat vision, made the intelligent decision to flee. It crashed back into the forest, moving with surprising speed for something so massive, leaving a trail of destruction through the ancient pines. Freya made no move to pursue it, instead watching Superman with an expression of clinical assessment. "Interesting," the goddess mused, her golden cider magic dissipating from her hands. She hadn't needed to intervene after all. "You hesitated at first, struggled with the necessity of killing, but when the boy's life was threatened, you acted without that hesitation. Protective instincts override moral philosophy. Good. That means you can be taught." Superman landed near the dead trolls, his chest heaving not from physical exertion, but from emotional strain. Blood seeped from dozens of small cuts where the creature's magically enhanced claws had found purchase, and his costume was torn in new places. The wounds were already healing, but slower than before, as if the magical nature of the injuries resisted his Kryptonian regeneration. "I killed them," Superman said quietly, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I've fought countless battles, faced enemies who threatened entire planets, and I've always found another way. But here..." Kratos approached him without sympathy or comfort, his scarred face impassive. Here you learned what I've been trying to tell you. In the 9 realms, mercy is measured carefully. You save it for those who deserve it, for those who can be reasoned with. Mindless beasts corrupted by dark magic are not among them. He gestured at Atreus, who was checking his bow for damage with shaking hands. You protected the boy. That was the correct choice. Would you rather have preserved your moral purity while watching him die? Superman's jaw tightened, but he met Kratos' gaze without flinching. No, of course not. But don't ask me to feel good about killing, even since it's necessary. The moment I start enjoying it, the moment it becomes easy, I've lost something essential to who I am. Freya moved closer, her boots crunching through snow as she studied the Kryptonian with renewed interest. Who you are is a luxury afforded by power and circumstance. In your realm, you are strong enough to afford mercy. Here, you're discovering the limits of that strength. She gestured at his injuries with one elegant hand. Those cuts are taking longer to heal than they should. The troll's magic is interfering with your regeneration. Another few hits like that and you'd be seriously wounded. A dozen more and you might actually die. Superman touched one of the deeper cuts, wincing slightly. So, what do? I can't change what I am. I can't suddenly develop resistance to magic just because it's convenient. Freya's smile returned, and this time it carried genuine enthusiasm. No, you can't change your fundamental nature. But you can learn to recognize magical attacks before they land, to dodge rather than tank damage, to identify enchanted weapons and empowered beings before engaging them in close combat. She began to circle him again, this time with the assessing gaze of a teacher evaluating a new student. Your fighting style in your home realm was probably simple. Overwhelming force applied directly to problems until they stopped being problems. Yes? Superman nodded reluctantly. Mostly. I could usually end fights quickly by demonstrating how outmatched my opponents were. Make them realize fighting was pointless. The goddess laughed. Here, that strategy will get you killed within a week. Every god, half the monsters, and a concerning number of enhanced mortals wield some form of magic. You need to become a defensive fighter, someone who reads opponents and adapts rather than simply applying superior strength. Atreus had recovered his composure and now approached Superman with the mix of curiosity and concern that seemed to be his default state. "Does it hurt?" the boy asked, pointing at the cuts. "The magic in the wounds, I mean. Father says magical injuries feel different than regular ones." Superman considered the question seriously. "It's like the wounds themselves are alive, fighting against my body's attempts to heal. There's a burning sensation that goes deeper than the physical damage." He looked at Freya. "Can you teach me to defend against that? Not just avoid magical attacks, but actually protect myself when avoidance isn't possible." Freya's expression grew more calculating. "That depends on how much you're willing to learn and how quickly you can adapt. Traditional magical defense requires either innate resistance, which you lack, or knowledge of counterspells and protective runes. The latter takes years to master for most practitioners." She raised one hand, and golden cider energy coalesced around her fingers in complex patterns. "But you're not most practitioners. Your alien physiology might interact with magic in unexpected ways. If we can understand exactly how magic affects you, we might be able to develop targeted defenses." Kratos had been listening while cleaning troll blood from his axe with methodical precision. "This training you propose, how long would it take?" The goddess shrugged, a gesture that somehow managed to be both casual and precise. "Weeks at minimum, months more likely. Teaching someone to sense and counter magic isn't like teaching them to swing a sword. It requires mental discipline, pattern recognition, and the ability to perceive energies most beings can't detect." Superman's expression showed frustration. "I don't have months. Thor said he'd give me 1 day before reporting back to Odin. After that, the All-Father will send everything he has to eliminate or control me." Freya's smile turned predatory. "Then we'd better make sure that when Odin's forces arrive, you're more valuable alive and cooperative than dead and defeated. The All-Father respects strength and utility above all else. If you can demonstrate that you're an asset rather than a threat, he might be willing to negotiate rather than simply destroy you." She gestured toward the deeper forest, where ancient trees towered over frozen streams and hidden valleys. "I have a sanctuary not far from here, warded against Odin's ravens and protected by enchantments that predate Asgard's founding. We can begin your training there, away from prying eyes." Kratos felt his instincts screaming warnings. Freya's sanctuary meant entering her domain, putting Superman under her direct influence, where the goddess could shape him according to her needs rather than his own interests. The Vanir goddess was offering genuine help, but help always came with strings attached when gods were involved. "We should return to my home first," Kratos said firmly. "The boy needs rest. Superman needs time to process what happened here. Training can begin tomorrow." Freya looked like she might argue, but something in Kratos' expression made her reconsider. "Very well. Tomorrow then. But don't waste time, Spartan. Odin's patience is measured in hours, not days. Every moment Superman spends unprepared is another moment closer to disaster." She mounted her stag with fluid grace, the animal's glowing antlers illuminating her face with an ethereal light. "I'll send word at dawn. Be ready." She and her soldiers vanished into the forest as silently as they'd arrived, leaving only disturbed snow and the lingering scent of cider magic to mark their presence. The silence that followed felt heavy with implications. Superman stood among the dead trolls, his heroic costume torn and blood-stained, looking lost in a way that had nothing to do with physical location. Atreus moved to his side, the boy's hand tentatively reaching out to touch the Kryptonian's arm in a gesture of comfort. "You did the right thing," Atreus said quietly. "You saved me. Whatever it cost you to do it, I'm grateful." Superman looked down at the boy, and some of the haunted expression faded from his face. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." He glanced at Kratos, who had finished cleaning his axe and was now scanning the tree line for additional threats. "Your son is wise beyond his years." Kratos grunted. "He has his mother's heart. In this realm, that is both blessing and curse." The Spartan began walking back toward his home, not waiting to see if the others followed. "Come. We have much to discuss, and little time to discuss it. If you're going to survive what's coming, you need to understand exactly what kind of enemy Odin is." Superman and Atreus fell into step behind him, the unlikely trio moving through frozen forest as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Above them, unseen in the storm clouds that perpetually shrouded Midgard during Fimbul winter, Odin's ravens circled and watched, their black eyes missing nothing as they gathered intelligence for their paranoid master. The Allfather already knew more than anyone realized, and his plans were already in motion. The question wasn't whether Odin would move against Superman, but how devastating that move would be when it finally came. Kratos' home appeared through the snow-laden pines like a defiant monument to survival in a realm that consumed the weak. The modest wooden structure stood on a cliff overlooking the frozen Lake of Nine. Its construction deliberate and utilitarian, with none of the divine grandeur that marked godly dwellings throughout the Norse realms. Superman studied it as they approached, and Kratos saw the Kryptonian's expression shift to something like recognition, as if the simple home reminded him of something from his own world. Inside, the warmth from the hearth pushed back against Fimbulwinter's endless cold. Atreus immediately moved to stoke the fire, adding wood with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd performed the task countless times. Superman stood near the doorway, seemingly uncertain whether to enter fully, his torn cape dripping melted snow onto the wooden floor. Kratos gestured toward the table where he and Atreus took their meals, a simple construction of heavy timber that had weathered years of use. "Sit, we talk." Superman moved to the table but didn't sit immediately, his attention drawn to the weapons mounted on the walls. The blades of chaos hung in their place of dishonor, chains coiled beneath them like sleeping serpents, their blades still faintly warm despite being unused for years. The Kryptonian stared at them with an expression Kratos couldn't quite read. "Those chains," Superman said quietly. "They're not just weapons. They're bound to you somehow. I can see the scars on your forearms where they were attached." Kratos felt his jaw tighten. The stranger's perception was uncomfortably acute. "They are a reminder of what I was. What I can become again if I lose control." He moved to the table and sat heavily, the wood creaking under his weight. "The god of war, Ares, bound these blades to me through blood magic. They made me his perfect instrument of slaughter. I used them to kill thousands in his name before I finally broke free and killed him in turn." Superman finally sat, his eyes never leaving the blades. "But you kept them. After everything they represent, you kept them." It wasn't a question, but Kratos answered anyway. "Because pretending the past doesn't exist doesn't make it go away. The blades remind me of the monster I was, the choices I made, the innocents I slaughtered." His scarred hands clenched on the table. "They remind me that redemption is not a destination, but a constant struggle. Every day I choose not to become that monster again is a victory." Atreus brought bread and dried meat to the table, setting it down before taking his own seat. The boy looked exhausted, the adrenaline from combat fading to leave only fatigue and the residual tremors that came after facing death. "Father," Atreus said, his voice carrying the weight of questions he'd been holding since the troll attack. "Superman killed to protect me, but you've always said killing should be the last option, that we should look for other ways first. Were you lying about that, or were the trolls different somehow?" Kratos considered his response carefully, aware that Superman was listening intently to how he answered. "I've never lied to you about this, boy. Killing should be the last option when dealing with beings capable of reason, of choice, of changing their actions through persuasion or threat." He gestured toward the window, toward the frozen wilderness beyond. But the trolls were corrupted by dark magic. Their minds were gone, replaced by nothing but rage and hunger. They could not be reasoned with, could not be frightened away, could only be killed or allowed to kill. In that situation, hesitation is just suicide with extra steps. Superman absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. So you make distinctions. Some enemies deserve mercy and others don't, based on their capacity for choice and reason. Kratos met his gaze directly. I make distinctions based on survival and necessity. Can this enemy be stopped without killing them? Will sparing them endanger those I protect? Has this enemy proven through their actions that mercy is wasted on them? He leaned forward, his scarred face intense. These are not philosophical exercises, stranger. These are calculations made in split seconds when lives hang in the balance. And in the 9 realms, getting those calculations wrong means death. Atreus picked at his food, clearly still processing the day's violence. But what about gods? They're capable of reason, capable of choice. Thor could have talked to us instead of attacking. Does that mean we should always try to reason with gods first? Kratos felt old memories stir, images of gods he'd killed across 2 pantheons flashing through his mind like a blood-soaked tapestry. Gods are the most dangerous category, because they possess reason and choice but often choose violence anyway. They have power without accountability, immortality without wisdom, and arrogance that blinds them to consequences. He picked up his own piece of bread, tearing it methodically. With gods, you must read their intent quickly. Thor came to test Superman, not to kill immediately. He could have led with lethal force, but chose to evaluate first. That bought time for words. But if Thor had attacked with full killing intent from the start, talking would have been suicide. Superman leaned back in his chair, which creaked alarmingly under his weight. In my world, I've fought gods too. Beings from different pantheons, different realities. Some of them started as enemies and became allies once we understood each other. He paused, his expression growing distant. But I've also fought gods who were fundamentally cruel, who saw mortals as toys or food. Those fights never ended peacefully. Kratos heard something in the Kryptonian's tone that sparked recognition. You killed them, these cruel gods in your world. You crossed that line when you had to. Superman's silence was confirmation enough. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. Yes, not often, and never without exhausting every other option. But yes, I've killed beings who left me no choice. Gods who would have destroyed entire civilizations if left unchecked. Tyrants who had proven over centuries that they would never change. His jaw tightened, and it haunted me every time. Still does. But I'd make the same choices again because the alternative was allowing innocent people to suffer and die. Kratos felt a grudging respect for the stranger's honesty. Then you understand more than your earlier words suggested. You know that ideals must sometimes bend to reality, that principles are tested most severely when following them means watching others die. He reached for his drinking horn, finding it still held water from earlier. The difference between your world and this one is scale and frequency. Here, that terrible choice comes not once in a lifetime, but weekly, daily sometimes. The 9 realms are built on violence and maintained through strength. Odin's peace is enforced through fear and overwhelming power, not through justice or mutual understanding. Atreus had been listening intently, his young face showing the struggle of someone trying to reconcile different moral frameworks. So when Odin sends people after Superman, we have to assume they're coming to kill, not talk. We have to be ready to fight immediately. Kratos nodded. Assume the worst and hope for better. Prepare for lethal force while remaining open to diplomacy if it presents itself. But never, ever drop your guard based on optimistic assumptions. He turned his attention back to Superman. Which brings us to the immediate problem. Thor gave you one day. That day is half gone already. Tomorrow, Odin will know everything Thor observed. Your strength, your speed, your vulnerability to magic, your reluctance to kill. The All-Father will use that information to craft a response designed to either control you or eliminate you. Superman's expression hardened with resolve. Then I need to train with Freya tonight, not tomorrow. Every hour I waste is an hour Odin uses to plan my capture or death. Kratos shook his head firmly. No. Exhausted training is worse than no training. You've been in combat. You've killed for the first time in this realm. You're processing trauma and adjustment to an entirely new reality. Training in that state will cement bad habits and leave you vulnerable to Freya's manipulation. He stood, moving to a chest against the far wall and retrieving blankets. You rest tonight. Process what happened. Let your body heal from those magical wounds. Tomorrow at first light, we go to Freya's sanctuary and you begin proper training. Superman looked like he might argue, but Atreus spoke first. Father's right. I've tried to train when I'm exhausted. It never works. You just make mistakes and hurt yourself worse. The boy managed a tired smile. Besides, you're bleeding through your costume. Those cuts from the trolls haven't healed completely yet. You need time. The Kryptonian touched his side where the deepest claw marks had landed, and his hand came away with fresh blood. The wounds were healing but slowly, fighting against the residual magic in the injuries. He nodded reluctantly. You're both right. I'm not thinking clearly. He looked around the modest home, seeming uncertain. Is there somewhere I can rest? I don't want to impose more than I already have. Kratos gestured toward a corner where furs were piled for additional sleeping space when needed. There. It's not comfort, but it's warm and dry. In these realms, that's luxury enough. As Superman moved toward the makeshift bed, Atreus caught his father's arm, pulling him aside to speak quietly. Father, do you think he can survive what's coming, even with Freya's training? Kratos watched Superman settle onto the furs, the Kryptonian's exhaustion finally catching up to him now that the immediate threats had passed. I don't know, boy. He's powerful, more powerful than almost anything I've encountered, but power alone doesn't guarantee survival against Odin. The All-Father has destroyed beings far stronger than himself through cunning and preparation. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. What I do know is that we're now caught in this, whether we want to be or not. Thor saw us with Superman. Freya has made contact. Odin's ravens are watching. We're already considered part of this situation, which means our survival depends on Superman's survival, at least in the short term. Atreus processed this with the seriousness it deserved. So we help him, not because we want to fight Odin, but because not helping him means Odin treats us as enemies anyway. Kratos nodded. Exactly. We buy time. We provide information. We help him survive long enough to either prove he's not a threat or become powerful enough that eliminating him is more costly than negotiating with him. He glanced toward where Superman lay, the Kryptonians breathing already evening into sleep despite the day's trauma. But we do not make promises we cannot keep. We do not swear oaths to fight Odin on Superman's behalf. We help him help himself, nothing more. The wind howled outside, Fimbulwinter's fury beating against the walls like something alive and hungry. Somewhere in the storm, Odin's ravens circled, and in Asgard's golden halls, the All-Father bent over prophecies and runes, calculating moves in a game that had claimed countless lives across millennia. Kratos added more wood to the fire, the flames pushing back against the cold and dark. Tomorrow would bring Freya's training, the first real steps toward understanding magic and how to defend against it. Tomorrow would bring Superman closer to whatever confrontation with Odin was inevitable. But tonight, in this small moment of peace, the ghost of Sparta allowed himself to acknowledge something he rarely admitted. He was tired of divine conflicts, tired of being drawn into battles between gods, tired of watching the innocent suffer while immortals played their power games. Superman represented something Kratos had long ago abandoned as impossible. The belief that strength could be used to protect rather than just destroy. That power didn't automatically corrupt. That mercy wasn't weakness but a choice made from position of strength. If Superman could maintain that belief, even after exposure to the Nine Realms' brutality, then perhaps there was hope for something better than the endless cycle of violence that had defined Kratos' existence. Or perhaps the realm would break the Kryptonians' idealism the way it had broken so many others, and Superman would become just another disillusioned warrior fighting for survival rather than purpose. Time would tell. Time always did. Kratos settled into his own bed, the Leviathan axe within easy reach, his warrior's instincts never fully allowing rest. Outside, the storm raged on, and in the darkness between worlds, forces beyond mortal comprehension continued their eternal dance of power and consequence. The Nine Realms had accepted a stranger into their brutal embrace, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Dawn came reluctantly to Midgard, the perpetual storm clouds of Fimbulwinter allowing only the barest suggestion of light to filter through. Kratos woke instantly, his warrior instincts pulling him from sleep to full alertness without the haze of grogginess that plagued normal men. He scanned the room immediately, cataloging threats and checking on those under his protection. Atreus slept soundly, his bow still within arm's reach, even in rest. Superman sat upright in the corner, his eyes open and staring at the ceiling with the 1,000-yard gaze of someone who'd spent the night wrestling with demons that had nothing to do with the realm's actual monsters. The Kryptonians' wounds had healed completely overnight, the torn flesh knitting itself back together now that the residual magic had been processed out of his system. His costume, however, remained torn and blood-stained, a stark reminder that even invulnerable beings could be damaged in the Norse realms. "You didn't sleep," Kratos observed, his voice cutting through the pre-dawn silence. Superman's attention shifted to him, and the Spartan saw exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. "I tried, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those trolls dying, felt their necks breaking in my hands." He looked at his palms as if they belonged to someone else. "In my world, I've gone years between kills. Here, I took 2 lives in a single day, and everyone acts like it's just another Tuesday. Kratos moved to stoke the fire, adding wood with methodical precision. In the 9 realms, it is just another Tuesday. Death is the common currency, violence the universal language. You will either adapt to this reality or be consumed by it. He turned to face Superman directly. But adaptation does not mean abandoning who you are. It means learning to survive long enough that your principles matter. Before Superman could respond, a knock echoed through the house. 3 precise strikes against the wooden door that carried the weight of formal announcement. Freya had arrived, and she'd brought the dawn with her. Kratos opened the door to find the Vanir goddess standing in fresh snow, her silver and green armor gleaming despite the dim light. Behind her, 2 of her soldiers stood at attention, their faces obscured by helmets, but their postures radiating professional discipline. "Good morning, Ghost of Sparta," Freya said, her voice carrying false cheerfulness that set Kratos' teeth on edge. "I trust your guest is ready to begin his education in surviving divine wrath." Superman had risen and now stood near the table, his torn cape hanging from his shoulders like battle damage earned rather than inflicted. "I'm ready. The sooner I learn to defend against magic, the better my chances of surviving whatever Odin sends next." Freya's eyes swept over him, cataloging the healed wounds and the determination in his posture. "Good. Motivation helps in magical training, though it won't save you if you lack the aptitude." She gestured toward the door. "My sanctuary is 3 miles north, through terrain that will test your stamina, even with your enhanced physiology. We leave immediately." Atreus had woken during the exchange and now scrambled to prepare for departure, gathering his bow and checking his arrows with practiced efficiency. Kratos noted the boy's automatic assumption that he'd be joining them and chose not to correct it. Atreus needed to understand magical theory as much as Superman did, perhaps more so given the divine blood flowing through his veins. They traveled through frozen forest as the weak dawn light struggled against perpetual storm clouds. Freya led with confidence, her feet finding purchase on ice-slicked stones that would have challenged mortal balance. Her soldiers flanked the group at a respectful distance, their presence a reminder that the goddess never moved without protection, regardless of how friendly her demeanor seemed. Superman moved with his earlier restraint, clearly holding back his full speed to match the group's pace. Kratos watched him process the landscape, saw the Kryptonian's eyes tracking potential threats and escape routes with the instincts of someone who'd survived countless battles. Whatever else Superman was, he wasn't naive about danger. "Tell me about your world," Freya said suddenly, her voice cutting through the crunch of boots on snow. "You mentioned gods there as well. How did mortals and divinity coexist?" Superman seemed surprised by the question, but answered thoughtfully. "Carefully. Most gods kept to themselves or operated through proxies. When they did intervene directly, heroes rose to oppose them if their actions threatened innocence. There was always tension, but also rules, spoken and unspoken, that kept conflicts from escalating into total warfare." Freya's laugh carried bitter undertones. "How civilized. Here, gods rule through fear and power projection. Odin maintains dominance by ensuring everyone knows he'll destroy anything that threatens Asgard's supremacy. The other pantheons exist in a state of enforced cooperation, backed by mutual assured destruction." She glanced back at him. "Your world sounds almost peaceful by comparison." Superman's expression darkened. It had its own horrors. Wars, genocides, beings powerful enough to crack planets fighting over ideology or resources. But there were also lines that most beings wouldn't cross, codes that even enemies respected, at least in theory. They crested a ridge, and Freya's sanctuary came into view. Kratos felt his breath catch despite himself. The structure defied conventional architecture, appearing to grow directly from the mountainside rather than being built upon it. Ancient trees wrapped around towers of living wood, their branches forming natural barriers and walkways that connected different sections. Runes carved into stone and bark glowed with soft golden light, pulsing in patterns that suggested active enchantments maintaining the perimeter. "Welcome to Folkvanga," Freya announced, using the Old Norse name with proprietary pride. "My personal domain, built long before Odin and I had our falling out. The enchantments here predate Asgard itself, woven from magic older than the current pantheon." She led them across a bridge of interwoven roots that spanned a chasm dropping into darkness. "Nothing enters or leaves without my knowledge. No ravens spy here, no Einherjar patrol these grounds. For the duration of your training, this is the only place in the 9 realms where you're truly safe from Odin's surveillance." Superman studied the sanctuary with evident appreciation. "It's beautiful, the way nature and structure integrate so seamlessly. I've never seen anything quite like it." Freya's expression softened fractionally. The Vanir understand that power flows through nature, that magic is woven into the world itself rather than imposed upon it. The Aesir build their golden halls and think dominance equals control. We know better. She gestured them toward a central courtyard where carved stones formed a circle around a pool of water that somehow remained unfrozen despite Fimbulwinter's grip. "This is where we begin. The fundamental lesson you must learn, Superman, is that magic is perception made manifest. It operates on rules that have nothing to do with your physical universe's laws. Where you come from, strength is measured in force and energy. Here, strength includes will, belief, and understanding of symbolic connections." Superman approached the pool, his reflection rippling in water that should have been solid ice. "I don't understand. How does belief translate to defense against magical attacks?" Freya moved to stand beside him, her hand extending toward the water. Golden cider energy flowed from her fingers, and the pool's surface began to glow with complex patterns that shifted and evolved like living things. "Watch. This is a simple cider manifestation, light created through will and channeled through runic frameworks." The patterns in the water coalesced into recognizable shapes. A bird taking flight, a tree growing from seed to ancient height in seconds, flames dancing without consuming. Each image felt more real than mere illusion, as if Freya's magic was reaching into possibility and dragging it partially into reality. "Now," Freya continued, her voice taking on the cadence of a teacher entering lecture mode, "physical force would do nothing to these manifestations. You could strike them with all your strength, and they'd simply reform because they're not truly physical. They exist in the liminal space between thought and matter." She waved her hand and the images dissolved. "But if you understood their nature, recognized the runic structures supporting them, you could unravel the magic itself, disrupt the patterns, break the symbolic connections, and the manifestation collapses." Superman studied the pool intently. So magical defense isn't about resisting force, but about understanding and countering the underlying structure? Freya's smile suggested pleased surprise. Exactly. You're quicker than most students. Physical beings struggle with this concept because they're trained to think in terms of direct opposition, meet force with force. But magic requires a more subtle approach. She gestured for him to extend his hand over the water. Try to sense the residual energy in the pool. Don't use your eyes or any physical sense. Reach out with intention, with will, with the part of you that exists beyond flesh. Superman hesitated, clearly uncertain how to follow instructions that made no conventional sense. Kratos watched this interaction with interest, remembering his own brutal introduction to understanding divine power when he'd first challenged Ares. Magic had always been something he encountered as an external threat to be endured or overcome through superior violence. The idea that it could be understood and manipulated through knowledge rather than just endured through toughness was philosophically alien to his Spartan worldview. Atreus, however, moved closer with evident fascination. The boy's divine heritage made him naturally sensitive to magical currents, and he'd been learning runic magic from various sources since discovering his true nature. I can feel it, Atreus said quietly, his hand hovering over the pool. Like warm currents in water, but made of something that isn't quite real. Patterns that want to mean something but haven't been given form yet. Freya's attention shifted to the boy with genuine interest. You have your mother's sensitivity to the world between worlds. Good. You'll help Superman understand what he's reaching for. She looked back at the Kryptonian. Your friend describes it well. Magic exists as potential waiting to be shaped. Learning to perceive that potential is the first step toward defending against it. Superman closed his eyes, his face showing intense concentration. For long minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, his expression shifted from frustration to something like wonder. I feel something like pressure that isn't quite pressure, warmth that isn't temperature. It's there, but I can't quite grasp it. Freya nodded encouragingly. That's because your Kryptonian physiology is fighting against perceiving something that shouldn't exist according to your universe's physics. Your cells are optimized for processing solar energy and physical stimuli, not magical resonance. We'll need to train your conscious mind to override your body's instinctive rejection of magical principles. She pulled her hand back from the pool, and the glow faded. This will be the foundation of your defense. You can't develop immunity to magic, but you can learn to recognize it quickly enough to dodge or deflect. And in combat, that split-second advantage often determines who lives and who dies. Kratos had been observing the perimeter while Freya taught, his warrior instincts never fully allowing him to focus solely on one thing. Now he spoke, his voice cutting through the lesson with pragmatic concern. How long will this training take before he can reliably detect magical attacks in combat? Freya turned to face him, her expression showing she understood the real question. How long before Odin's next move? How long did they have before theory needed to become practical application? For most students, months or years, she admitted. But Superman isn't most students. His perception speed is extraordinary. His mental processing capabilities far exceed normal limits, and he's highly motivated by imminent danger. If he applies himself completely, I can teach him basic recognition and evasion within days. maybe a week." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "But that's assuming Odin gives us that time. And assuming Superman can overcome the fundamental disadvantage of his physiology, actively rejecting magical principles." Superman opened his eyes, and Kratos saw determination there that bordered on obsession. "Then we don't waste a single moment. Whatever you need to teach me, however uncomfortable or difficult, I'm ready. I've trained myself to move faster than thought, to perceive threats at microscopic levels, to push my body beyond any reasonable limit. I can learn this." Freya studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Then we begin the deep work immediately. Atreus, you'll assist by providing magical demonstrations that Superman must learn to sense and react to. Kratos, you'll provide physical pressure to ensure he learns to detect magic while under combat stress." She moved to the center of the stone circle, her hands already beginning to glow with cider energy. "This will be painful, Superman. Magic you can't properly perceive or defend against will hurt you repeatedly. Your body will heal, but the learning process will be brutal." Superman stepped into the circle without hesitation, his cape settling around him like a shroud. "I've endured pain before. I can handle this." Freya's smile was almost sad. "We'll see. Most beings say that before they truly understand what magical combat feels like to someone with your particular vulnerability, but I admire your courage." She raised her hands, and the runes carved into the surrounding stones began to pulse with increasing intensity. "Let's begin your education in surviving the impossible." The first magical strike hit Superman like lightning, and his scream echoed across Folkvanger as training began in earnest. Kratos watched impassively, understanding that mercy now would only ensure death later. Atreus flinched at Superman's pain but held his position, ready to assist as instructed. The sanctuary's ancient enchantments hummed with power, concealing the sounds of agony from Odin's distant ravens as they circled above storm clouds, searching for intelligence they would never gather. Inside Folkvanger's protected boundaries, Superman learned the first and most fundamental lesson of surviving in the Nine Realms. Pain was the price of knowledge, suffering was the currency of growth, and only those willing to endure both had any hope of standing against the gods. The training had begun, and there would be no mercy until understanding replaced ignorance. No rest until instinct replaced conscious thought. This was how warriors were forged in the Norse realms, and Superman would either emerge stronger or be broken in the attempt. 3 days passed in Folkvanger, though time seemed to lose meaning within the sanctuary's enchanted boundaries. Superman had learned more about pain in those 72 hours than in his entire life before arriving in the Nine Realms. Freya's training was relentless, systematic, and brutally effective. She began with the basics, teaching him to recognize the subtle distortions in reality that preceded magical manifestations. Every failure resulted in magical strikes that bypassed his invulnerability completely, burning through his nervous system like liquid fire. Every success earned him seconds of respite before the next lesson began. Kratos watched the Kryptonian transform before his eyes. Gone was the hesitation, the instinctive pull toward mercy that had defined Superman's early encounters. In its place emerged something harder, more focused, shaped by necessity and survival instinct. The stranger still held his core principles, but they were now wrapped in pragmatic understanding of when idealism was luxury and when it was suicide. On the third evening, as Fimbulwinter's perpetual twilight deepened outside the sanctuary, Superman stood in the stone circle facing simultaneous attacks from Freya's cider magic and Atreus's runic arrows. His eyes tracked both threats with mechanical precision, his body moving with economy of motion that Kratos recognized from his own combat training. When Freya's golden energy lashed toward him, Superman twisted aside with just enough movement to avoid contact, not wasting energy on excessive evasion. When Atreus's enchanted arrow came from his blind spot, Superman's hand snapped up and caught it mid-flight, his enhanced perception having detected the magical signature microseconds before it would have struck. "Stop," Freya commanded, and both attacks ceased immediately. The goddess approached Superman with an expression that mixed satisfaction with genuine surprise. 3 days. In 3 days, you've achieved what takes most practitioners months to learn. You can now reliably detect and evade basic magical attacks in combat conditions. Superman lowered his guard slowly, his chest heaving from exertion that was more mental than physical. Sweat dampened his hair despite the cold, and his costume bore new tears from the training sessions where he hadn't dodged quite fast enough. But his eyes were clear, focused, and carried the confidence of someone who'd pushed past previous limits. "Basic attacks," he repeated, seizing on the qualifier. "What about advanced magic? What about Odin's power specifically?" Freya's expression grew more guarded. Odin's magic operates on an entirely different level. He doesn't just use Seda. He's traded pieces of himself for knowledge and power that predates the current pantheon. His eye, his sanity, his very identity have been sacrificed for magical abilities that border on reality manipulation. She gestured toward the pool, which now showed swirling images of Asgard's golden halls. "You can detect his magic coming, yes. You might even dodge some of it. But defending against the All-Father's full power," she shook her head slowly, "that requires either magical immunity you don't possess, or political maneuvering that makes direct confrontation unnecessary." Kratos had been sparring with Atreus in the courtyard's periphery, drilling the boy on maintaining awareness during combat. Now he approached, the Leviathan axe resting against his shoulder. Then the goal shifts. Superman doesn't need to defeat Odin. He needs to survive long enough to negotiate, to prove he's more valuable as an ally than as a corpse. Superman turned to face him, and Kratos saw the Kryptonian processing this strategic reality. Negotiate from a position of strength. Show I can't be easily killed, but also show I'm willing to cooperate if treated reasonably. The ghost of Sparta nodded. Odin respects strength above all else. If you can demonstrate that destroying you will be costly, perhaps costly enough to weaken Asgard's position relative to other realms, he might be willing to accept your presence under specific conditions. Atreus joined them, his young face thoughtful. But how do we demonstrate that without actually fighting Asgard's full forces? If Superman fights too hard, it looks like aggression. If he doesn't fight hard enough, it looks like weakness. Freya smiled at the boy's insight. Precisely the dilemma, which is why timing matters enormously. She waved her hand over the pool, and the images shifted to show Odin's great hall, where the All-Father sat upon his throne, surrounded by ravens and advisors. By now, Thor has reported everything he observed. Odin knows Superman's capabilities, his vulnerabilities, and his reluctance to kill unnecessarily. The All-Father is calculating the most efficient way to neutralize or control this threat. The image zoomed closer, showing Odin's single eye studying something that looked like prophecy scrolls covered in runes. But Odin is also cautious. He won't commit overwhelming force until he's certain of the outcome. He'll send another test, something designed to reveal information Thor couldn't gather. As if summoned by prophecy, a sound cut through Folkvanger's protected silence, a horn blast that echoed across the mountainside with impossible clarity. Freya's expression shifted instantly from teacher to warrior goddess, her hands glowing with combat-ready cider energy. The perimeter alarm. Something has breached my wards. Her soldiers materialized from the sanctuary's shadows, weapons drawn and faces hidden behind helmets that reflected the rune's golden glow. Kratos already had the Leviathan axe in hand, frost coiling along its blade as he moved to defensive position beside Atreus. Superman rose into the air slightly, hovering a few feet above ground as his eyes scanned the tree line with penetrating vision that could see through solid matter. "I count 12 figures approaching from the north," Superman reported, his voice carrying the clipped precision of tactical assessment. "Humanoid, heavily armed, moving in coordinated formation. But there's something else. Something larger hanging back in the forest. I can't quite make out what it is through all the magical interference." Freya cursed in Old Norse, the words carrying power that made the air shimmer. Odin moves faster than expected. Those are berserkers, warriors bound to Asgard through blood magic and enchanted with fury that makes them nearly unstoppable. And if something larger accompanies them... She trailed off, her expression darkening with realization. "He sent Nidhogg." Kratos felt ice that had nothing to do with temperature settle in his gut. Nidhogg, the dragon that gnawed at Yggdrasil's roots, an ancient creature of pure malevolence that served no master willingly, but could be temporarily bound through Odin's most powerful magic. If the All-Father had deployed both berserkers and a dragon, this wasn't a test. This was an execution. "We can't fight that here," Kratos said flatly. "Nidhogg will tear through these wards eventually, and berserkers don't stop until they're dead or their target is destroyed." He looked at Superman directly. "You wanted to demonstrate strength without seeming aggressive. This is your opportunity. Protect Freya's sanctuary. Show Odin that attacking you has consequences." Superman's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Where do you need me?" Freya was already weaving defensive enchantments, golden barriers springing into existence around the sanctuary's most vulnerable points. The berserkers first. They'll try to breach the inner wards. If they succeed, they'll slaughter everyone inside before turning their attention to you. Kill them quickly. She paused, meeting Superman's gaze. "And I do mean kill them. They're already dead men walking, their humanity sacrificed to Odin's binding magic. Mercy would be wasted." The Kryptonian's expression showed he understood, though the acceptance didn't come easily. He rose higher into the air, his cape billowing as wind from the approaching storm whipped through the sanctuary. "What about the dragon?" Freya's smile was sharp and predatory. "Leave Nidhogg to me. I've faced that serpent before, and I know its weaknesses. just keep the berserkers away from my concentration." She turned to Kratos. "Spartan, you and your son reinforce the inner defenses. If any berserkers break through Superman's line, you're the last barrier between them and the non-combatants sheltering here." Kratos nodded, already moving toward the sanctuary's inner chambers, where Freya's attendants and scholars had gathered. Atreus followed, his bow ready and his face set with determination that made him look older than his years. The boy had seen too much combat already, but that was the price of divine blood in the 9 realms. The horn blast sounded again, closer now, and then the berserkers emerged from the tree line. They were massive warriors clad in furs and bronze, their eyes glowing with the unnatural light of Odin's binding magic. Runes covered their exposed skin, pulsing with power that enhanced strength and dulled pain reception to nothing. They carried axes and swords that gleamed with enchantments, weapons designed to kill gods and monsters with equal efficiency. They saw Superman hovering above the sanctuary and charged without hesitation or battle cries. Berserkers didn't waste breath on intimidation. They simply killed until nothing remained to kill. Superman descended to meet them with speed that turned him into a crimson and blue blur. His first strike caught the lead berserker in the chest with enough force to create a steel, and the warrior's enchanted armor shattered like glass. But the berserker didn't fall. The binding magic kept him upright and fighting even as broken ribs punctured lungs that no longer needed to breathe. He swung his axe in a vicious arc that would have decapitated any normal opponent. Superman caught the weapon's haft and crushed it to splinters, then drove his fist through the berserker's chest and ripped out whatever magical core kept the dead man animated. The warrior collapsed, truly dead now, his glowing eyes fading to empty sockets. 11 more remained, and they adapted immediately to Superman's tactics. They spread out, forcing him to choose targets while others flanked and attacked from blind spots. Their weapons carried enchantments that burned when they connected with Superman's skin, each strike leaving shallow cuts that smoked and sizzled with magical corruption. The Kryptonian had learned from his training. He didn't try to tank the damage or trust his invulnerability. He moved constantly, using his flight advantage to stay mobile, striking precise blows that disabled or destroyed the magical cores, keeping the berserkers animated. But even crippled, the warriors fought on with mindless determination, grabbing at Superman's legs, trying to drag him down to where their numbers could overwhelm him. Kratos watched from his position near the inner sanctum, evaluating Superman's performance with professional assessment. The stranger was learning, adapting, fighting smart rather than relying on raw power. But the berserkers were testing him, pushing him toward exhaustion, buying time for something else. Then Nidhogg arrived, and everything changed. The dragon burst through the tree line with the force of an avalanche, given wings. Its scales were black as void, each one etched with runes of decay and corruption. Its eyes burned with hatred older than the current pantheon, and its breath carried the stench of death and rot. When it opened its maw, darkness itself seemed to pour forth. Not fire, not frost, but pure entropy, given form. Freya met the dragon with a wall of golden cider energy that blazed like a newborn star. The entropy and creation magic collided with a sound like reality, screaming, and the shockwave shattered trees for 100 yards in every direction. "Focus on your target, Superman," Freya shouted, her voice strained from the effort of containing Nidhogg's assault. "I'll handle the worm." But the dragon was a distraction, Kratos realized with sinking certainty. Nidhogg was powerful, ancient, and deadly, but it wasn't the real threat. While Superman fought berserkers and Freya contained the dragon, something else was moving through the chaos, something that had waited for exactly this moment when all attention was divided and defenses were stretched to breaking. From the shadows between burning trees, a figure emerged that made even Kratos' blood run cold. Heimdall, the Watcher, the all-seeing guardian of the Bifrost, Odin's most dangerous enforcer. And he was walking directly toward the sanctuary, with the casual confidence of someone who knew exactly how this would end. Superman saw him and moved to intercept, abandoning the berserkers to focus on this new threat. But Heimdall simply smiled, his eyes glowing with the foresight that let him see every possible future, every potential attack, every conceivable strategy. "Don't bother, stranger," Heimdall called out, his voice carrying perfect clarity despite the chaos. "I've already seen how this ends. Every move you make, every choice you consider, I've witnessed them all play out across countless possible futures. You cannot surprise me. You cannot defeat me. You can only accept the inevitable." Superman didn't slow. He accelerated, his fist pulled back for a strike that would pulverize stone, aimed at Heimdall's smug face with every ounce of Kryptonian strength. Heimdall moved at the last possible instant, his body flowing aside like water as Superman's punch carved through empty air. The Watcher's counter-strike was precise and devastating, a blade coated in runic magic that carved across Superman's ribs, opening a wound that immediately began to burn with magical corruption. "I see your every action before you take it," Heimdall continued conversationally, dancing away from Superman's furious combination of punches and heat vision with contemptuous ease. "Your speed means nothing when I know where you'll be. Your strength means nothing when I'm never where you strike, and your determination." He laughed coldly. "That just means you'll suffer longer before accepting defeat." Superman's blood dripped onto snow that hissed and steamed, the magical wound refusing to heal properly. The Kryptonian's expression showed frustrated realization dawning. Against an opponent who could see the future, conventional combat was impossible. Every strategy would be anticipated. Every attack would be dodged. Every defense would be circumvented. Heimdall was the perfect counter to Superman's abilities, and Odin had known it. This was why the All-Father had sent the Watcher. Not to kill Superman necessarily, but to prove that the stranger could be defeated, could be controlled, could be made to understand that resistance was futile. Kratos made a decision in the space between heartbeats. He couldn't let Superman face Heimdall alone. Not because he cared about the stranger particularly, but because if Superman fell here, everyone present would be implicated in rebellion against Odin. The All-Father would make examples of them all. "Boy," Kratos shouted to Atreus, "maintain the inner defense. I'm going to even the odds." He didn't wait for acknowledgement. The ghost of Sparta launched himself into the fray, the Leviathan axe singing as it left his hand, frost trailing behind it like a comet of winter fury. The axe wasn't aimed at Heimdall. The Watcher would see it coming and dodge. Instead, Kratos threw it at the ground directly beneath Heimdall's feet, and when the enchanted weapon struck, ice exploded outward in a sphere of flash-frozen death. Heimdall's foresight showed him the axe coming, and the logical assumption would be to dodge the throw itself. But Kratos hadn't aimed for the Watcher. He'd aimed for terrain control. The ice erupted in all directions, making every surface treacherous and forcing Heimdall to focus on maintaining balance rather than purely on offense. Superman capitalized instantly on the opening, his tactical mind processing Kratos' strategy and adapting. If Heimdall could see the future, then the solution wasn't to be unpredictable. It was to create situations where even knowing the future didn't provide advantage. Superman grabbed one of the fallen berserker's bodies and hurled it at Heimdall with enough force to break the sound barrier. The Watcher saw it coming and moved to dodge, but Superman was already hurling a second corpse, then a third, filling the air with projectiles that forced Heimdall into an increasingly narrow cone of possible movements. Kratos recalled the Leviathan axe to his hand and immediately closed distance, not attacking Heimdall directly, but positioning himself to cut off escape routes. The Spartan had fought precognitive enemies before, beings who could read intent and predict actions. The trick wasn't to be unpredictable. It was to create no-win scenarios where every choice led to disadvantage. Clever, Heimdall admitted, his casual confidence fracturing slightly as he found himself hemmed in by projectiles, ice, and two warriors working in unintentional coordination. The Spartan understands tactical geometry, and the alien learns quickly. But you're still fighting an opponent who sees every outcome. He raised his hands, and golden energy erupted from his palms. Not cider like Freya's magic, but something else. Something that felt older and more fundamental. Bifrost energy, raw and barely controlled. The same power that connected the 9 realms. When it struck Superman, the Kryptonian screamed. Not from pain exactly, but from something worse. His body began to flicker, phasing in and out of reality as Bifrost energy tried to shunt him between realms. Heimdall was attempting to banish Superman entirely, to remove the problem by ejecting it from the Norse cosmology altogether. No! Freya's voice cut through the chaos, the goddess abandoning her containment of Nidhogg to redirect her cider magic toward Heimdall. You will not use the Bifrost as a weapon in my sanctuary. Her golden energy clashed with Heimdall's reality warping power, and the collision threatened to tear Folkvanga apart at the seams. Nidhogg, freed from Freya's containment, immediately turned its attention toward the nearest targets. The dragon's entropy breath washed over 3 of the remaining berserkers, and even Odin's binding magic couldn't prevent them from dissolving into component atoms. The creature's malevolent intelligence recognized opportunity in the chaos and began to rampage without direction or loyalty, attacking everything in range with equal enthusiasm. Sir Atreus emerged from the inner sanctum despite Kratos' orders, his bow drawn and arrows nocked with runic magic that pulsed with potential. Father, the dragon's heading for the courtyard. If it reaches the pool, Freya's wards will collapse. The boy was right. Kratos could see Nidhogg's trajectory. See the ancient worm's instincts driving it toward the nexus of magical energy that powered the sanctuary's defenses. If the dragon corrupted that source, everyone inside would be exposed to whatever Odin sent next, and there would be something next. The Allfather never deployed assets without backup plans upon backup plans. Superman was still flickering in and out of phase, fighting against Bifrost energy with sheer willpower and the Kryptonian cellular structure that shouldn't exist in this reality at all. His face showed strain beyond anything Kratos had witnessed during the training sessions, blood running from his nose as his body tried to anchor itself across multiple realms simultaneously. Heimdall maintained his assault with professional focus, ignoring Freya's interference through techniques Kratos didn't understand. "The Allfather sends his regards, stranger," the Watcher said coldly, "and his terms: surrender yourself to Asgard's custody, submit to binding magic that will ensure you cannot threaten the realm, and you may live. Refuse, and I'll scatter your atoms across dimensions until nothing remains but legend." Superman's eyes blazed red with heat vision, but the beams passed through Heimdall's afterimage as the Watcher moved before the attack was fully executed. "Your answer, alien? Submission or annihilation?" Kratos saw the moment of decision crystallize on Superman's face. The Kryptonian stopped fighting against the Bifrost energy trying to phase him out. Instead, he relaxed into it, letting the reality warping power flow through him rather than resisting its pull. For a heartbeat, Superman became translucent, barely present in the Norse realm at all. Then he reversed the process with explosive force, using his Kryptonian physiology's rejection of this reality's physics as a weapon. He pushed himself back into full manifestation so violently that the resulting shockwave of conflicting physical laws shattered Heimdall's Bifrost manipulation completely. The Watcher stumbled, his foresight momentarily blinded by the sheer impossibility of what Superman had just accomplished. And in that instant of blindness, Superman moved. Not with his full speed, not with the blur that Heimdall's precognition could track and counter, but with precision borrowed from 3 days of brutal training. He didn't try to hit the Watcher. He grabbed him, his hand closed around Heimdall's throat with just enough pressure to control without crushing, and then Superman flew straight up at speeds that turned the world into a smear of color and vertigo. Within seconds, they were 2 miles above Folkvanga, so high that the air was thin enough that mortal lungs would have burst. Heimdall struggled, his foresight screaming warnings about trajectories and impact velocities, but Superman's grip was absolute. "You want my answer?" Superman said, his voice carrying despite the howling wind at this altitude. "Here it is. I will not submit to Odin's slavery. I will not be bound or controlled or turned into another weapon in his arsenal. But I also won't be driven from this realm like a threat to be eliminated." He looked down at the tiny speck that was Freya's sanctuary, at the even smaller specks that were Kratos and Atreus fighting impossible odds. "Tell Odin that I'm willing to negotiate. But the terms are mutual respect, not master and slave. If he can't accept that, then we find out whether Asgard can afford a war with someone who doesn't follow his rules." Heimdall's eyes widened fractionally. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't dare." Superman's grip tightened just enough to cut off the Watcher's words. "I'm not bluffing. I've fought tyrants before, Heimdall. Gods who thought their power made them untouchable. Want to know what happened to them?" The Kryptonian's eyes began to glow with restrained heat vision. "They learned that every throne has a breaking point. Every empire has vulnerabilities, and every all-seeing precognitive has blind spots when facing enemies from outside their frame of reference." He released Heimdall suddenly, letting the Watcher fall 100 feet before catching him again. The stomach-dropping sensation making even the unflappable guardian of the Bifrost gasp. "So tell your Allfather I'll meet him. Neutral ground, limited retinues, actual diplomacy instead of threats and tests. And if he refuses? Superman's smile was cold and carried none of his earlier compassion. Then I stopped holding back. I stopped trying to find peaceful solutions, and I show him exactly why beings in my realm learn to fear what happened when someone with my power decided mercy was a failed experiment. He descended rapidly, releasing Heimdall 50 feet above the sanctuary with just enough force that the Watcher had to focus entirely on not shattering every bone in his body upon landing. Heimdall hit the ground hard but intact, his armor cracked, and his expression showing shock that someone had actually manhandled him. That someone had created a situation his foresight couldn't navigate through pure physics violation. Superman landed beside Kratos, who'd been fighting the remaining berserkers with brutal efficiency during the aerial confrontation. The Spartan had reduced the warriors to scattered components, their magical cores destroyed, and their bodies finally allowed to achieve the death Odin's magic had denied them, threatening the All-Father directly. Kratos observed, his tone carrying something that might have been approval. Bold, possibly suicidal, but bold. Freya had managed to drive Nidhogg back through a combination of containment wards and aggressive Zador strikes that left the dragon wounded and retreating into the forest. She approached now, her armor scorched and her face showing exhaustion from channeling so much power continuously. You've made your statement, Superman. The question is whether Odin respects strength enough to negotiate, or whether this was the provocation that ensures he mobilizes everything Asgard has to destroy you. Heimdall climbed to his feet slowly, his perfect composure shattered, but his eyes still carrying dangerous intelligence. The All-Father will receive your message, whether he grants your request for negotiation. The Watcher paused, and for the first time, uncertainty colored his voice. I cannot see that future clearly. Your presence distorts prophecy itself. You're a variable that shouldn't exist, and that makes you more dangerous than any threat Odin has faced in centuries. He raised his hand, and Bifrost energy coalesced around him, preparing to transport him back to Asgard. Expect a response within the day, and pray to whatever gods your realm honors that the All-Father's curiosity outweighs his paranoia. The light flared, and Heimdall vanished, leaving only scorched earth where he'd stood. The berserkers were dead, Nidhogg was retreating, and an uneasy silence settled over Folkvangr. Superman swayed slightly, and Kratos realized the Kryptonian was nearing collapse. 3 days of brutal training followed by combat against multiple magical threats had pushed even his extraordinary physiology to its limits. The wounds from enchanted weapons weren't healing properly, and the Bifrost energy had done something to Superman's cellular structure that was clearly causing internal havoc. Inside, Freya commanded, already moving toward the sanctuary's healing chambers. You need treatment before those magical corruptions spread. As they moved toward shelter, Atreus appeared at Kratos' side, his face pale but determined. Father, that was incredible. Superman actually threatened Odin. Does that mean we're at war with Asgard now? Kratos placed a hand on his son's shoulder, the gesture both protective and cautionary. We're in the space between peace and war, where anything can happen. Odin will either respect Superman's display of strength or see it as intolerable defiance. Everything depends on how the All-Father's paranoia balances against his pragmatism. They entered the healing chamber, where Freya was already preparing herbs and runic salves designed to counter magical corruption. Superman lay on a stone table, his costume torn beyond recognition and his skin showing the angry red marks of magical burns. But his eyes were clear and focused, the eyes of someone who'd made a decision and would see it through regardless of cost. "Did I do the right thing?" Superman asked quietly, the question directed at no one in particular. Threatening a god-king in his own realm, forcing confrontation instead of trying to find a peaceful solution first. That's not who I am. That's not what I stand for. Kratos moved to stand where Superman could see him clearly. You did what the situation required. Odin respects only strength and cunning. Approaching him with peaceful intentions and no demonstration of power would have been seen as weakness to exploit, not nobility to respect. The Spartan's expression was grim, but not without understanding. Sometimes the only way to achieve peace is to prove war would be too costly. Sometimes mercy must be preceded by a demonstration of capacity for destruction. You didn't compromise your principles, Superman. You adapted them to a reality that required adaptation. Freya began applying her salves, and Superman hissed through clenched teeth as the magical preparations burned against corrupted wounds. "The Spartan speaks truth," she said, her voice carrying grudging respect. "Odin has ruled for millennia through careful calculation of costs and benefits. You've made yourself costly to eliminate and potentially valuable to negotiate with. That's more than most beings achieve when facing the Allfather's attention." Atreus had been quiet, processing everything he'd witnessed. Now he spoke with the insight that divine blood sometimes granted. "But what happens if Odin decides you're too dangerous to leave alive no matter the cost? What if he commits everything Asgard has to destroying you?" Superman closed his eyes, his face showing exhaustion that went beyond physical. "Then I do what I've always done. I fight for those who can't fight for themselves. I protect the innocent even if it means standing alone against impossible odds. I hold the line." He opened his eyes again, and Kratos saw in them the same stubborn idealism that had defined the Kryptonian from the beginning, now tempered by brutal experience, but not broken. "I didn't ask to come to your realm. I don't want to be the catalyst for war or suffering. But if Odin forces my hand, if he makes it clear that the only options are submission or destruction, then I choose door number 3. I fight for a better option even if everyone says it's impossible." Kratos felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps the memory of what hope used to feel like before the 9 realms had beaten it out of him. "Then prepare yourself, stranger, because within hours we'll know whether Odin's response is an invitation to negotiate or a declaration of total war." Freya finished her treatment and stepped back, studying her work with professional assessment. The magical corruption is contained, but not eliminated. You'll need days of rest to fully heal, and even then, some scars will remain. Magic leaves marks that even Kryptonian healing can't fully erase. She met Superman's gaze directly. "But you survived Heimdall. You defied the Watcher's foresight and threw Odin's confidence back in his face. That's more than any being has accomplished in living memory. Whatever comes next, you've earned the right to face it standing rather than kneeling." Outside, storm clouds gathered with unnatural intensity. Thunder rolled across Midgard with deliberate rhythm, and lightning carved runes into the sky that spelled messages only gods could read. Somewhere in Asgard's golden halls, Odin received Heimdall's report and made calculations that would determine the fate of not just Superman, but potentially all 9 realms. The Allfather's paranoia was legendary, but so was his pragmatism. Would he see Superman as an existential threat requiring total mobilization? Or would he recognize the Kryptonian as a potential asset that could be brought into Asgard's sphere through negotiation backed by mutual respect? The answer would come soon, and when it did, nothing in the 9 realms would ever be quite the same again. A stranger from beyond the stars had proven he could not be easily dismissed or destroyed. Now the realm would discover whether gods and aliens could coexist, or whether this was the beginning of a war that would make Ragnarök itself seem like a minor disagreement between neighbors. The answer came not with thunder or bifrost light, but with silence. A raven landed on Folkvanger's outer wall 3 hours after Heimdall's departure, its black feathers reflecting no light despite the sanctuary's golden runes. The bird carried a single message bound to its leg, a scroll sealed with Odin's personal mark, the symbol of the Allfather pressed into wax that still radiated warmth as if freshly applied. Freya retrieved the message herself, her expression unreadable as she broke the seal and unrolled parchment that was older than most mortal civilizations. Her eyes scanned the text once, then twice, before she looked up at Superman with an expression mixing surprise and calculation. Odin agrees to meet. Neutral ground. 3 days from now at the base of Yggdrasil, where Midgard and Asgard's roots intertwine. Limited retinues, no more than 3 companions each. He acknowledges your display of strength and expresses interest in understanding what you represent. She paused, her voice dropping slightly. He also warns that if this meeting is a deception or trap, he will unleash forces that will make today's assault look like a gentle warning. Superman pushed himself upright, despite Freya's protests, the magical burns still angry and raw across his torso, but no longer spreading. 3 days, that's enough time to heal properly and prepare. He looked at Kratos. Will you come with me? I know I'm asking a lot, but I could use someone who understands how to negotiate with gods who speak in threats and power dynamics. Kratos had been staring out the window at the frozen landscape, his mind already calculating angles and contingencies. The smart move would be to refuse, to maintain distance from whatever arrangement Superman and Odin reached. But Heimdall had seen him fighting alongside the Kryptonian, and Odin's ravens had doubtless documented everything. The ghost of Sparta was already implicated beyond extraction. I will come, Kratos said finally. Not as your ally in whatever bargain you strike with the Allfather, but as witness and advisor. I've dealt with gods who offer seemingly generous terms that carry poisoned hooks. I can help you see what Odin leaves unsaid. Atreus's face lit with excitement before darkening with concern. What about me? Can I come? Kratos turned to his son, seeing in the boy's eager expression the same curiosity that had led them into so many dangerous situations. No, you will remain here with Freya, where the sanctuary's wards can protect you. If this meeting goes wrong, if Odin betrays the terms and attempts to capture or kill us, I need you safe and able to continue. The boy's face showed disappointment but understanding. He'd matured enough to recognize when his father's decisions came from pragmatism rather than lack of trust. I understand. But Father, be careful. Odin's famous for finding loopholes in agreements. Don't let him bind you to something that seems reasonable but isn't. Kratos placed a hand on Atreus' shoulder, the gesture carrying weight beyond words. I have fought my way free from divine manipulations before, boy. I will not be caught again. The 3 days passed in tense preparation. Freya taught Superman the basics of recognizing magical contracts and binding agreements, the subtle ways gods could trap the unwary through seemingly innocent phrases. Kratos drilled him on negotiation tactics, on reading body language and recognizing when threats were genuine versus postured. And Superman himself spent hours in meditation, processing everything he'd learned about the 9 realms while trying to maintain the core of who he was beneath the brutal pragmatism survival had required. On the morning of the meeting, they stood before Folkvanger's gates as dawn's weak light struggled through Fimbulwinter's perpetual clouds. Superman had repaired his costume as best he could, though tears and burns remained as testament to battles fought. Kratos wore his traveling armor, the Leviathan axe secured to his back, and the blades of chaos concealed but accessible if needed. Freya joined them despite not being invited. Her presence a statement that she had interests in whatever transpired between Superman and Odin. "Remember," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of experience with Asgardian politics. "Odin will offer what seems reasonable but contains conditions that limit your freedom. He may promise safety in exchange for service, protection in exchange for loyalty, knowledge in exchange for bindings. Refuse anything that smells of chains, no matter how golden the metal." Superman nodded, his expression showing the gravity with which he approached this meeting. "I understand. And if negotiations fail," Kratos answered before Freya could, "then we fight our way out and deal with the consequences. But fighting the Allfather directly in his place of power would be suicide. If it comes to violence, we retreat and regroup, not stand and die for pride." They traveled through frozen forest toward the meeting place, each step carrying them closer to a confrontation that would define Superman's existence in the Norse realms. The base of Yggdrasil, where Midgard and Asgard's roots intertwined, was a place of ancient power where reality itself grew thin, and the boundaries between realms became permeable. No violence could occur there without risking damage to the World Tree itself, which made it as neutral as any ground could be in Odin's domain. The Allfather was already waiting when they arrived, and his presence was overwhelming in ways that had nothing to do with physical form. Odin stood perhaps 6 feet tall, his aged frame wrapped in robes that shifted between gold and shadow, depending on angle and light. His single eye blazed with intelligence and madness barely held in check, and the weight of his attention felt like being studied by something vast and inhuman wearing a god's shape. Beside him stood Thor, his expression carefully neutral, and Heimdall, whose eyes tracked Superman with the wariness of someone who'd been surprised once and refused to be caught unaware again. "Superman," Odin said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with Yggdrasil's roots themselves. "The stranger from beyond the stars, the alien who holds powers that should not exist in my realms, you have caused considerable disruption in a very short time." Superman stepped forward, his posture respectful but not submissive. "I didn't choose to come here, Allfather. I was pulled into your realm by forces I don't control, but I'm here now, and I want to find a way to coexist peacefully rather than add to the Nine Realms' conflicts. Odin's single eye narrowed, studying Superman with intensity that felt like being dissected at the molecular level. Peaceful coexistence, an admirable goal. But you must understand my position. You represent an unknown variable in a system I've carefully maintained for millennia. Your powers bypass conventional limitations. Your presence distorts prophecy itself, and your principles seem fundamentally incompatible with how the Nine Realms function. The All-Father began to circle slowly, his movements somehow making the ancient god seem younger and more dangerous. I could kill you. Not easily, and not without cost, but I could marshal sufficient magical force to overcome even your considerable durability. But that would waste potential and potentially create a martyr whose legend might prove more dangerous than the living being. He stopped in front of Superman, his expression unreadable. So I offer you an alternative. Serve Asgard. Not as slave or prisoner, but as champion. Use your power to defend the Nine Realms from threats that even gods struggle to contain. In exchange, I grant you protection, resources to research how you arrived here, and perhaps eventually assistance in returning to your home realm. The offer hung in the air, seemingly generous but carrying implications that made Kratos' instincts scream warnings. Superman's expression showed he recognized the trap, even if he couldn't articulate all its details. Serve Asgard, Superman repeated carefully. Under what terms? With what freedom to refuse orders I find morally objectionable? What happens if defending the Nine Realms requires actions I can't take in good conscience? Odin's smile was sharp and pleased, as if Superman had passed a test by asking the right questions. You would swear an oath of service with built-in limitations. You could refuse orders that violate your core principles, though such refusals would be noted and potentially affect our arrangement. You would have freedom to act according to your conscience within the framework of Asgard's greater interests. Kratos stepped forward then, his gravelly voice cutting through the diplomatic language. In other words, he becomes your weapon with the illusion of choice. His principles become leverage you can use to manipulate him into serving your purposes, and if he refuses too often, you declare him in breach of oath and use that as justification to eliminate him with the Nine Realms' full support. Odin's single eye shifted to Kratos, and the weight of that attention was crushing. The ghost of Sparta, killer of Olympus. You speak from experience with divine manipulations, I see. The All-Father's tone carried respect mixed with warning. But consider, what alternative does your friend have? He cannot return home. He cannot hide from my attention indefinitely. And he cannot survive in the Nine Realms without some form of political protection. I offer him a genuine path forward, however imperfect. Superman looked between Odin and Kratos, processing arguments from both sides. When he spoke, his voice carried the conviction of someone who'd made a decision and would accept its consequences. I appreciate the offer, All-Father, but I can't swear an oath of service, even with limitations. I've seen too many good people twisted by well-intentioned compromises that gradually eroded who they were. I won't become your champion, your weapon, or your tool, no matter how reasonable the terms seem. Odin's expression darkened, and for a moment, the storm clouds above seemed to respond to his mood. Then what do you propose? How do you imagine surviving in my realms without my protection or blessing? Superman met his gaze without flinching, and in that moment, Kratos saw the true strength of the Kryptonian, not his invulnerability or his speed, but his absolute refusal to compromise on core principles even when pragmatism screamed that he should. I propose coexistence based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy. I'll defend the innocent when I encounter threats, not because you ordered it, but because that's who I am. I won't interfere in Asgard's politics or challenge your authority unless your actions threaten those who can't defend themselves. And in exchange, you grant me the same courtesy. Don't treat me as subject or threat, but as independent party who happens to occupy space in your realm. The audacity of the proposal hung in the air like a physical presence. Superman was essentially asking Odin to treat him as an equal, to accept his presence without control or containment. For a god king who'd spent millennia ensuring absolute dominance over his realm, it was an almost incomprehensible request. Thor looked stunned. Heimdall's expression showed he'd foreseen this possibility, but hadn't believed Superman would actually voice it. And Odin himself stood perfectly still, his single eye blazing with emotions too complex to pass. Then, impossibly, the All-Father laughed. Not the bitter mockery of earlier, but genuine amusement that carried undertones of respect. You would stand before the Master of 9 Realms and demand to be treated as peer rather than subject. Either you are the bravest being I've encountered in centuries, or the most foolish, possibly both. His laughter faded, replaced by calculating assessment. But there is merit in your proposal, however arrogant. You are an unknown variable that I cannot easily eliminate or fully control. Fighting you would be costly. Forcing you into service would create resentment that would eventually manifest as betrayal. But allowing you to operate independently, with understood boundaries. Odin was silent for a long moment, and Kratos could practically see the All-Father running calculations across countless possible futures. Finally, the God King nodded slowly. Very well. I will accept your proposal, with conditions. You may exist in the 9 realms as independent party, answering to no god or king. But if your actions threaten Asgard's stability or the realm's balance, I will consider our agreement void and act accordingly. You will not interfere in conflicts between pantheons or involve yourself in divine politics unless directly threatened. And you will meet with me quarterly to discuss your activities and ensure our understandings remain aligned. The All-Father extended his hand in a gesture that seemed to pain him, offering partnership to someone he would have preferred to control. These terms are non-negotiable. Accept them or face the consequences of existing in my realm without any protection or understanding. Superman looked at the offered hand, then at Kratos, who gave the barest nod of approval. The terms weren't perfect, but they were far better than the alternatives. They granted Superman genuine autonomy while acknowledging Odin's legitimate concerns about maintaining cosmic balance. The Kryptonian stepped forward and clasped Odin's forearm in the warrior's grip that transcended cultures and realms. I accept your terms, All-Father. Thank you for being willing to find a middle path rather than forcing confrontation neither of us wanted. Odin's grip was iron despite his aged appearance. Do not thank me yet, Superman. You have chosen a difficult path, existing between worlds, belonging to none while being observed by all. The 9 realms do not treat outsiders gently, and your independence will be constantly tested by those who see you as tool to be used or threat to be eliminated. He released Superman's arm and stepped back. But you have earned the right to try, survive, adapt, and perhaps you will find your way home. Or perhaps you will discover that home is not always a place, but a purpose. The meeting concluded with formal declarations that would be carried by ravens to all corners of the 9 realms. Superman would be recognized as independent entity, neither subject to Asgard nor enemy of it, free to act according to his conscience within broadly defined boundaries. It was an unprecedented arrangement, the kind of political compromise Odin rarely made. And its very existence spoke to how much the Allfather feared the cost of the alternative. As they traveled back toward Folkvanga, Kratos felt something he hadn't experienced in years: cautious optimism. Superman had navigated impossible politics through combination of strength, principle, and willingness to find middle ground without compromising core values. He'd proven that mercy and idealism could survive even in the 9 realms if backed by sufficient power and tempered by practical wisdom. "You did well," Kratos said quietly as they walked through snow that seemed slightly less oppressive than before. "You maintained your principles while acknowledging reality. That balance is difficult even for those raised in these realms." Superman managed a tired smile. "I had good teachers. You showed me when to fight and when to adapt. Freya taught me how to survive what should kill me. And Atreus reminded me that hope matters, even when everything seems designed to crush it." He looked up at the storm clouds that perpetually shrouded Midgard. "I don't know if I'll ever find my way home. But while I'm here, I can try to be what I've always been. Someone who protects those who need protecting, who stands between innocent people and threats they can't face alone. Even if the methods are different, even if the brutality is greater, that core purpose remains." Kratos thought about his own journey. From Spartan warrior to god of war, to outcast trying to raise a son in a realm that had no mercy for weakness. He'd believed redemption was impossible, that the ghost of Sparta was defined forever by blood spilled and gods murdered. But watching Superman maintain idealism despite exposure to the 9 realms' darkness suggested that perhaps change was possible for anyone willing to fight for it. "The realms will test you constantly," Kratos warned. "Gods will seek to manipulate you. Monsters will challenge you. Mortals will fear and worship you in equal measure. Every day will present choices between what is easy and what is right." He stopped walking and turned to face Superman directly. "But if you can survive all that while remaining who you are at your core, then perhaps you will accomplish what I never could. Prove that power does not inevitably corrupt, that strength can exist alongside compassion, and that hope is not just naive denial of reality, but a choice made despite full understanding of how brutal existence can be." Superman extended his hand, and Kratos clasped it in the same warrior's grip he'd witnessed between the Kryptonian and Odin. "Thank you, Kratos, for everything, for saving my life more than once, for teaching me what I needed to learn, and for being the kind of person who's seen the worst of existence but still chooses to protect his son and help strangers who fall from the sky." The ghost of Sparta allowed himself the ghost of a smile. "Don't make me regret it, stranger. The 9 realms have enough problems without you adding to them through well-intentioned incompetence." They continued toward Folkvanga as the weak sun finally broke through storm clouds for the first time since Superman's arrival, casting golden light across frozen landscape that seemed somehow less desolate than before. Behind them, Yggdrasil's branches reached across realms, carrying word of unprecedented agreement between Alien and Allfather. Ahead, Atreus waited with questions and excitement. Freya calculated how to use this development to her advantage against Odin, and the 9 realms adjusted to accommodate a new variable in their ancient equations. Superman had fallen to Midgard as stranger and threat. He would remain as something more complex, independent champion bound by conscience rather than oath. Outsider who'd earned respect through combination of strength and principle, living proof that even in realms built on violence and brutality, there was room for those who chose a different path. The gods had learned to fear what happened when unstoppable force met immovable idealism. Now they would learn what happened when that force chose to exist alongside them rather than submit or conquer. It would not be easy. It would never be simple. But for the first time since crashing into snow and ice, Superman felt something approximating hope. Not the naive belief that everything would work out, but the determined conviction that the fight for something better was worth sustaining even against impossible odds. In the 9 realms where gods bled and heroes fell, a stranger from distant stars had planted a flag and declared that mercy, hope, and justice would survive. Time would tell whether that declaration was prophecy or epitaph. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to simply stand and face whatever came next with clear eyes and steady resolve. The gods fear what you've witnessed. More tales await.